Chapter 1028. The ancestral Emperor Jian Chen calmed down and removed the space rings from the two old men before rejoining Rue Jin and the others in the air. He said, "Senior Rue Jin, I want to go to the Felicity Empire next. Please create a space gate for me." Rue Jin did not turn down Jian Chen's request and instead agreed to it without any hesitation. "I just happen to have looked into the territories of the three great empires, so I know their precise locations." With that, Rue Jin extended a finger and swung it casually. The space ripped open, quickly forming a space gate. Jian Chen stared unblinkingly at Rue Jin's ordinary and simple action. His eyes shined with interest as he seemed to be deep in thought. He already knew that he would not be able to undergo breakthroughs as easily as before once he reached partial achievement, and that every layer would require the comprehension of the laws of the world. As a result, he paid close attention to how Rue Jin ripped open space. Not only does Senior Rue Jin's action of ripping open space contain his comprehension of the laws of space, it also possesses the control of power. Space is a law while energy also has its own way. Looks like I've already begun to interact with the laws when I was a saint ruler, except that it was just a smattering of it, Jian Chen mumbled inside. Once I deal with the matters on hand, I'll immediately go to Mercenary City and get Xiao Ling to invoke the mysteries of the world for me to comprehend. I'll work hard on increasing my strength. Jian Chen and the others, including the four protectors, immediately stepped through the space gate and disappeared from the air above the Xueqi kingdom as soon as it had formed. Yu had already been sent into the artifact space when Jian Chen fought with the Saint Kings before. The Felicity Empire was one of the three great empires of the continent. It possessed a lengthy history and had two of the 7 capital cities of the continent, the City of the Heavenly Spirits and Thunder City. The City of the Heavenly Spirits was the imperial capital of the empire, where the imperial palace was located. As the imperial capital of the Felicity Empire, the prosperity of the City of Heavenly Spirits was naturally self-evident. Countless organizations consisting of large and small clans filled every space within the city walls. Experts gathered and were as common as clouds. However, there was one exception. There was a huge mixture of people within the city walls of the imperial capital, but it was governed very well, so there were extremely few cases of violence. Jian Chen's group appeared in the air above the city after passing through the spatial gate. They looked down at the land below them and with a rough scan, they found where the imperial palace was. They immediately flew in that direction. Currently, the pale-faced Fang Yan and Ta Ji, who had just come back from the Xueqi kingdom, sat on cushions as they meditated in a majestic hall within the palace. Before them sat a middle-aged man in a set of luxurious gilded robes. His face was dark as he angrily glared at Fang Yan and Ta Ji. The man was extremely handsome, and the presence of a ruler radiated from him. He was filled with prestige. He was an imperial protector of the Felicity Empire as well, and he was stronger than Fang Yan and Ta Ji. He was at the peak of the 7th heavenly layer as well as an emperor who had abdicated several years ago. He was a member of the imperial family. The Blood Sword sect is just too arrogant for injuring the imperial protectors of my Felicity Empire. How dare they? And I can feel that imperial protector Luo Duo's presence has disappeared. He must have suffered a mishap. Humph, the Blood Sword sect is going too far. Do they really think that they can trample all over the dignity of the empire just because they have Houston supporting them? The middle-aged man growled unhappily. The Felicity Empire was one of the 3 great empires of the continent, and even among ancient clans, there were not many that could rival them. As a result, they treated their dignity with more importance than anything else. The Blood Sword sect had heavily injured 2 of their imperial protectors regardless of the consequences and even killed one. It was not something that the Felicity Empire could bear with. Saint Kings were the central force of the empire, so Luo Duo's death was an extremely heavy loss. Even with the entire empire in perspective, they could count the number of Saint Kings with their fingers, so Saint Kings were not something they could obtain just because they wanted to. The middle-aged man immediately rose up from his cushion as icy cold light flickered in his eyes. He growled, "Houston actually dares to offend my Felicity Empire like this right before he's about to pass away. Looks like he's trying to do something big before he dies. If that's the case, we'll strike first and wipe out his sect." Dealing with the Blood Sword sect with the strength of our empire is naturally not a problem, but how do we deal with Houston? And other than Houston, there's a new sect leader. He's extremely powerful when he wields an emperor armament and definitely has the capacity to fight you, Ta Ji said with a deep voice. I'll keep the new sect master busy. We can get the ancestral emperor to deal with Houston. Although the ancestral emperor is slightly weaker than Houston, Czar Kai-Yun of the Czar clan and Hao Wu from the Holy Empire still owe me a favor. I'll go to the Holy Empire this instance to find them, so they can assist the ancestral emperor. I think the three of them should be more enough to deal with Houston, the middle-aged man said. However, his eyes suddenly froze when he finished speaking, and he quickly raised his head. Very quickly, Ta Ji and Feng Yan sensed it as well. They looked into the distance, and their expressions immediately became ugly. It's the new sect master of the Blood Sword sect. He's actually come to our Felicity Empire. With that, a sharp light flashed across the middle-aged man's eyes and he snorted, "Perfect. New sect master. I'd like to see what you want to do today." With that, the middle-aged man strode towards the outside. "You cannot go." At this moment, an old voice boomed in the hall. It was filled with an absolute prestige that could not be denied. The middle-aged man came to a stop and turned around. He saw that a sage-like old man had appeared on the highest throne within the hall at some point. The man's expression slightly changed, becoming filled with respect. He bowed to the old man with Ta Ji and Feng Yan. "I greet the ancestral emperor." The old man was the ancestral emperor of the Felicity Empire. He was already over 5,000 years of age and was the oldest member of the imperial family. The ancestral emperor within the royal family of the empire did not refer to the founding emperor, but the oldest and most powerful past emperor. There would always be one, just one. "You all stay here and go nowhere. Do not interfere with the matter outside," the ancestral emperor nonchalantly commanded. However, he was looking outside. His profound gaze seemed to be able to look through the various structures and obstructions to see Jian Chen's group. Jian Chen and the others flew toward the imperial palace of the empire, landing on a roof of a hall. "Who has come? Why do you not come through the main entrance? Do you not know the rules of the empire?" The four protectors of the Blood Sword sect radiated with baleful force, so it was extremely hard for them to conceal themselves. As soon as Jian Chen's group landed, a loud call rang from the palace. Several saint rulers began to radiate with tremendous presences as they threateningly flew to where Jian Chen and the others were, encircling them. At the same time, all the guards of the palaces moved, surging out in all directions like a tide. They formed a sea of people very soon, surrounding the area where Jian Chen and the others stood. A saint ruler glanced past the four protectors of the Blood Sword sect and growled, "Are you from the Blood Sword sect?" The four protectors said nothing, as if they had not heard the question at all. Jian Chen scanned the saint rulers coldly with an expressionless face and icily asked, "Where is Bai Jian? Come up quickly for your death?" Although Jian Chen spoke very softly, it resounded throughout the entire imperial palace. Immediately, another 20-odd saint ruler presences began to radiate from various places of the palace. They all quickly approached Jian Chen's group, joining the encirclement. All of them seemed to carry ill intentions. Without a doubt, what Jian Chen had said had expressed the fact that he had come to the imperial palace of the Felicity Empire to make trouble. They were enemies. "Who are you to come make trouble for the imperial palace? Do you think that you have lived too long so you want to die earlier? Brat, you're the first one to come make trouble at the imperial palace in recent years. If you're sensible, tie yourself up and go plead for forgiveness from the emperor. He might spare your life." The saint rulers around Jian Chen all called out. Although they knew that Jian Chen's group was not easy to be trifled with, they were in the imperial palace of the empire. It was their territory, and they had quite a few imperial protectors inside. Jian Chen's face slightly sank. "I have no intentions of becoming your enemies. I have only come with intention of killing Bai Jian. Will you be handing him over or not? How dare you look down on the dignity of the empire? It doesn't matter who you are. You have committed unforgivable crimes. Let's capture these troublemakers and pass them to the emperor for judgment," a saint ruler called out. He was a 9th heavenly layer saint ruler and seemed to be extremely prestigious among the group of people. The other saint rulers all began moving after he spoke. "Stop." At this moment, an old voice boomed from the depths of the imperial palace, though the owner of the voice was not present. It was filled with absolute prestige and could not be denied. The saint rulers that had gathered around Jian Chen immediately stopped. They gave a deep polite bow to the depths of the palace. They did not know who exactly the speaker was, but they were certain that it was at least an imperial protector. "Brother, my Felicity Empire has no ill will with you. May I ask why have you come to make trouble?" The old voice rang out once again. It was the ancestral emperor. A prince of your empire by Jian, gathered several millions of mercenaries from many mercenary groups to take my city. Say, is this ill will? Jian Chen replied with a deep voice. He felt no fear at all. So brother has come for that matter. From today on, Bai Jian will no longer be a member of the Felicity Empire. His life or death will have nothing to do with the empire. I hope we can clean the slate between us like that. How do you feel about that? The ancestral emperor's tone was extremely amiable and without any hostility, as if he was trying to negotiate. Chapter 1029. Another visit to the city of God. All the saint rulers around Jianchen became stupefied when they heard what the ancestral emperor had said. At that moment, they struggled to believe what they had heard, actually doubting whether their ears had a problem or not. The Felicity Empire was a powerful empire that had existed on the continent for countless years. It was extremely powerful. Its dignity was almost holy and could not be impinged upon. Anyone who dared to enter the empire in an attempt to cause trouble would be dealt with mercilessly, teaching that person a severe lesson. They had never been so flexible before, which was why everyone refused to believe what they heard. The current emperor appeared outside a beautiful palace in dragon robes and a golden violet crown. He stared at Jian Chen's group as a large group of experts protected him. Your Majesty, just what is with the imperial protector today? Why is he negotiating with a troublemaker and even dismissing Prince Bai Jian of his position? He's an extremely talented saint ruler. Not only has he comprehended a saint-tier battle skill many saint kings have failed to grasp, he will definitely become a saint king in the future as well. Are we really supposed to just abandon such a genius? A valiant golden-armored, middle-aged man asked in confusion beside the emperor. The way the empire was treating its enemy today did not seem like what it would usually do. The emperor stared into the depths of the palace as respect filled his face. He mumbled, "It's the voice of the ancestral emperor. The ancestral emperor must have his reasons for doing this." What? It's the ancestral emperor. The armored man's face changed and immediately became courteous as well. Even the experts around the emperor reacted in similar fashions. Respect filled their faces and even a sliver of excitement appeared for some. The ancestral emperor possessed a supreme status within the Felicity Emperor. Although he had abdicated several years ago, every single sentence from him was equivalent to an imperial edict. Not only could he make any decision for the entire empire, he could even dismiss the current emperor or any official in the government. However, the ancestral emperor always stayed in the forbidden grounds near the back of the palace in cultivation, almost never interfering with anything. He would rarely appear even over the span of several hundred years, and there were rarely any people who had the right to personally visit him. All the people only heard of the story of his existence, which was why so many people became so shocked when they learned that the old voice from the depths of the palace belonged to the ancestral emperor. Jian Chen smiled with what the ancestral emperor had said. He clasped his hands to the depths and loudly said, "Senior truly is a decisive person. Since Bai Jian is no longer a member of the Felicity Empire, I naturally will have no problems with the empire. However, please hand over Bai Jian to me. Brother, Bai Jian is not in the imperial palace right now. If you want to find him, you might as well go to the Holy Empire. You can find him there," said the ancestral emperor. The Holy Empire, Jian Chen mumbled. He had not thought that Bai Jian had actually run off to the Holy Emperor, but he immediately followed up with, "The Holy Empire is so big, finding someone would be almost impossible. May I ask Senior of the precise location?" "The Tsar family in the City of God," replied the ancestral emperor. A gleam of light immediately flashed across Jian Chen's eyes when he heard that. He thought back to the moment when he had faced enemies from everywhere due to the Tsar family, which caused his face to slightly sink. "Senior, I thank you for telling me. Farewell." Jian Chen clasped his fists at the depths of the palace before leaving with Rui Jin and the others. "Brother, our Felicity Empire wishes to be eternal friends with you. If brother has some time in the future, you are welcome to come visit the empire." The ancestral emperor's voice rang out once more. The voice traveled very far, landing clearly in Jian Chen's ears. Jian Chen's group traveled far from the imperial palace before leaving through a space gate Rui Jin created. They directly made their way to the Holy Empire. A middle-aged man looked at the seated ancestral emperor in confusion within a beautiful hall after Jian Chen had left. He asked, "Ancestral Emperor, why must we speak in such a humble manner to them? Do we really fear the mere blood sword sect with our strength?" As long as we work with Czar Kaiyun and Hao Wu, wiping out the Bloodsword sect would be easy. The ancestral emperor gently sighed with that. It's indeed possible to wipe out the Bloodsword sect with the Felicity Empire's strength, but I never thought that it would be him who had become the sect master. It really is a surprise. The ancestral emperor suddenly became stern and stared fixedly at the three people before him. He said, remember, the three of you, never have any conflicts with the Bloodsword sect in the future. If you come across anyone from there, you must treat them politely and you must not offend them. Do you understand? Ancestral Emperor, just who is the new sect master to make someone as great as you be so cautious? The middle-aged man was curious. He's someone we can't offend. In all of recent history, he's the only one who dared to provoke the 10 Protector clans while the Protector clans could not do anything to him. At the same time, he's a person who dares to swagger recklessly throughout the entire continent after offending the only human Saint Emperor and 2 Saint Emperors from the Beast God continent. With that, the ancestral emperor stared deeply at the three of them. I think you should know who he is. The 3 Saint Kings in the hall became completely stunned with that. They all paled. Only now did they finally know who the person they had offended was. They had never seen Jian Chen, but his name was like a thunderclap to them. Virtually no expert of the continent did not know the name Jian Chen. However, only a very few number of people had seen his appearance. In the City of God, Bai Jian wore luxurious robes with gold linings as he conversed at ease with the Grand Elder of the Tsar family in a hall. He was smiling and possessed quite a striking demeanor. However, no one knew that he was extremely nervous despite his composed exterior. He had learned that Jian Chen had returned mightily several days ago and had taken back Flame City with lightning speed and claimed his father's life. He became filled with deep fear because of this. He knew Jian Chen would come looking for him, and he would not be forgiven. Before, he had visited the ancestral emperor of the Felicity Emperor to request for him to deal with Jian Chen. However, he was turned down, which was why he had come to the Tsar family in the Holy Empire. He wanted to find experts to deal with Jian Chen. Grand Elder, I've already stayed here for several days. May I ask if the esteemed Senior Tsar Kaiyun is willing to meet with Junior? Junior has important matters to inform Senior of. Bai Jian could no longer bear with it anymore, asking the Grand Elder again. The Grand Elder was a 9th heavenly layer saint ruler. He was stronger than Bai Jian and belonged to the Tsar family of the 3 great clans. But Bai Jian was the most talented prince, acknowledged by the public, of the 9 princes in the Felicity Empire. He also knew a saint-tier battle skill, so he treated Bai Jian extremely politely and courteously. Please do not worry, Prince Bai Jian. I have already passed on your request to the Ancestor. If Ancestor wishes to see you, she will naturally send out the word, so please wait a few more days, smiled the Grand Elder. Bai Jian's expression took an ugly turn. He had already waited here for several days, and if it were to continue like this, he would not be able to see the Ancestor even after several months. Suddenly, an idea flashed through Bai Jian's head. He clasped his hands. Grand Elder, please pass this message on to Senior Tsar Kaiyun. Bai Jian is close with the heavenly enchantress and has learned of some matters of the past from her. This includes the intense love that Senior Hao Wu and Tsar Kaiyun once had. Junior has come this time to offer up a plan that can eliminate the estrangement between the 2 seniors and get the 2 back on good terms. The Grand Elder's eyes froze when he heard that, and he immediately became stern. He stared fixedly at Bai Jian. Prince Bai Jian, is that true? If you trick the Ancestor, the consequences will be extremely severe. It is completely true. Bai Jian swore. Bring him to me. The cold voice of a female rang through the hall as soon as Bai Jian finished speaking. However, it was impossible to discern its origin. The Grand Elders hurriedly put down the teacup in his hand and stood up. He politely said, "Yes, Ancestor." A hall that glimmered with violent light existed in a huge cavern below the estate of the Tsar family. Bai Jian entered the deep underground through a tunnel under the Grand Elder's lead. He directly entered a palace and stopped before a tightly closed room of seclusion. "Ancestor, I have brought Bai Jian under your orders," the Grand Elder courteously informed her. "Bai Jian stays. You can go." A cold woman's voice rang from the room. It was completely emotionless. "Yes, Ancestor," the Grand Elder politely replied before immediately leaving. Bai Jian greets the esteemed Senior Tsar Kaiyun. Bai Jian became polite as he stood outside the room, bowing deeply. "Bai Jian, You say you have a method to mend my relationship with Hao Wu?
Yes.
Bai Jian indeed has a method to mend the relationship. Senior Czar Kaiyun is welcome to try it, Bai Jian cautiously answered. He was at his wit's end.
Speak.
What is the method? Czar Kaiyun's voice rang out of the room again. This time, a sliver of urgency was present. Just as Bai Jian wanted to speak, a tremendous presence suddenly appeared outside. It enveloped the entire city of God, such that even Bai Jian, who was underground, could clearly feel it. On the surface, a space gate silently opened in the air. Jian Chen and the others emerged from it, levitating high up in the sky. Chapter 1030. Czar Kaiyun floating above the city of God. Jian Chen glanced past the slightly familiar city. He could not help but think back to all the things that had happened when he was last here, revealing a sliver of reminiscence. 8 clans of the city of God, the Czar family, I, Jian Chen, have returned. Back then, you sent all those experts to attack me, almost claiming my life. Today, I will look down on your city, Jian Chen said with a deep voice. His eyes became icy as he spoke, and a tremendous presence began to radiate from him. It enveloped the entire city, and within it was his undisguised battle intent. Many years ago, Jian Chen still needed to move around the city of God cautiously despite his extraordinary strength. There were many experts he could not afford to offend, but today, he could move brazenly about the city, publicly challenging the authority of a capital of the continent. Jian Chen's presence alarmed all the people in the city. Everyone could feel it clearly, regardless of their strength, and those weaker felt like a huge boulder pressed down on their chests. They struggled to even breathe. What a great presence! Who is the owner of this presence? Are they challenging the city? Various voices rang out around the city, while the empty streets became filled with people very quickly. In a moment, everyone surged out of their houses, and some people even looked at the sky as they stood on their roofs. All the ancestors of the 8 clans opened their eyes at the same time and stared outside in shock from their places of seclusion. Without the slightest hesitation, they stopped their cultivation and rose up, heading over with their greatest speed. The president of the Radiant Saint Master Union sat on his bed in a luxurious room at the highest, most central part of the castle-like union. Suddenly, he snapped his eyes open when the great presence surged in from outside. He immediately glanced in the direction of the presence through the window and furrowed his eyebrows. He mumbled with a deep voice, "What powerful presence! The owner must be at least a saint king, and there's a great battle intent sandwiched in between. The battle intent so great that very few people can be in possession of it, even with the whole continent in perspective. Odd, who is this person? He's clearly challenging the Czar family by releasing his battle intent so recklessly, but I don't seem to remember the Czar family offending such a great expert before." Doubt filled his mind. At this moment, the door was pushed open. The Grand Elder of the Union sternly walked in from outside and began speaking as soon as he came in. The person must have come to find trouble with the Czar family. "They're not weak. President, we might as well go and have a look. Let's hope they heavily injure the Czar family and reduce the pressure the Union is facing." The president closely sensed the presence and seemed to be in deep thought. A sliver of suspicion gradually appeared on his face. Weird. Grand Elder, why do I feel that this presence is somewhat familiar, as if I have met this person somewhere before, but out of all the impressions of Saint Kings I've come in contact with, there doesn't seem to be someone who matches up to this presence. It really is odd. Just who is this person? The Grand Elder's expression changed with that. A sliver of curiosity appeared on his face as he said, "Since you've mentioned it, I also feel somewhat familiar with this presence, but I can't think of who it is. President, since we can't tell who it is, why don't we go together to see just who this person is?" Afterwards, the president and Grand Elder left the union together with multiple saint rulers. They shot off in the direction of the presence with lightning-like speed. An extremely ordinary-looking old man carefully wiped the tables and the single bookshelf in the Radiant Saint Tower of the Union. Suddenly, the old man paused and a gleam of light immediately exploded in his eyes. He mumbled, "Looks like the city of God is going to get lively again. I wonder which expert the Czar family has offended." With that, the old man disappeared. He had turned into a faint blur, leaving the tower with lightning speed as he flew to the presence. Jian Chen and the others floated silently several thousand meters in the air above the Czar family. Soon afterwards, several tremendous presences appeared in the surroundings. They traveled extremely quick, arriving around Jian Chen in just a few seconds. They surrounded him 100 meters away. The saint rulers were the ancestors of the 8 clans. They were all stern, staring at Jian Chen in caution. None of them dared to create a disturbance, as they could all tell that the young man before them was a saint king from his presence alone. They could not afford to provoke him. May I inquire of the senior's great name and exactly what has caused a misunderstanding with our city of God for senior to be so angry? An ancestor clasped his hands at Jian Chen as he asked with an extremely polite tone. Jian Chen coldly gazed past the ancestors of the 8 clans. His gaze became extremely sharp, like a drawn sword. Wherever he gazed past, the people would feel like they were being stabbed, feeling a vague pain. His gaze caused them to shiver despite the warmth. Senior? Ha 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 ha, I never thought that I'd become a senior to you. People of the 8 clans, have you really forgotten so quickly? Why don't you open up your eyes and carefully look at who I am? Jian Chen laughed. His tone was mocking. With that, all the saint rulers began to examine Jian Chen. Very soon, one of them recognized him. His expression suddenly changed, becoming overwhelmed by disbelief. He cried out, "Why, you're young Yu Tian. You're Jian Chen." "Bai Jian is indeed with my Tsar family," Tsar Kaiyun gently replied. Her voice possessed no emotion. "Hand over Bai Jian," Jian Chen demanded. Chapter 1031. Fighting Tsar Kaiyun, 1. As soon as Tsar Kaiyun heard what Jian Chen said, her face immediately changed. She said, "Jian Chen, I don't care what disagreements you have with Bai Jian, but I hope you can resolve your differences in the future. I cannot hand Bai Jian to you right now. Since you can't hand over Bai Jian, I can only go and get him myself." Jian Chen's gaze became rather cold as great battle and killing intent surged from his body. It quickly skyrocketed while the Emperor armament had appeared in his right hand. Destructive chaotic force slowly poured out, revolving around the weapon. "Wait!" At this moment, an old voice hurriedly rang out. An old man who seemed to be in his 70s shot up from below, carrying a person in his hand. It was Bai Jian. The Tsar family had a total of 2 saint kings. One was Tsar Kaiyun while the other was the old man before them. "Jian Chen, greetings." The old man first greeted Jian Chen before continuing. "Jian Chen, I am Tsar Vimer. My Tsar family is willing to hand Bai Jian over to you. I hope we can dismiss any previous disagreements and enmity, and we are willing to apologize to you for what we did before. I hope the slate between us can be wiped clean and we can start anew." The old man spoke with sincerity. He did not want Jian Chen as an opponent at all. Bai Jian could not move since he was in Tsar Vimer's hands. When he heard the old man's words, he paled in fright. He knew exactly what would happen if he ended up in Jian Chen's hands. "Save me, Senior Kaiyun, save me. If I die, Senior Kaiyun will never be forgiven by Senior Hao Wu," Bai Jian loudly pleaded. He placed all his hopes on Tsar Kaiyun. Tsar Kaiyun's eyes darkened as a sliver of determination appeared. With a slight movement, she silently appeared beside Tsar Vamos and struck at him with a handful of powerful energy. At the same time, she reached for Bai Jian with her left hand. "Kaiyun, are you crazy? What are you doing?" Tsar Vamos' expression drastically changed. He had never thought that Tsar Kaiyun would suddenly attack him. He was her great-grandfather after all. Although Tsar Kaiyun had moved suddenly, Tsar Vamos was still an experienced saint king. He reacted in the shortest amount of time. He gathered a thick layer of world force in his hand in an instant and struck out with lightning speed. Bam! The 2 palms collided, and a muffled sound immediately rang through the air. A terrifying ripple of energy radiated in all directions, knocking away all the saint rulers who had gathered in the surroundings to watch. Although Tsar Vamos was Tsar Kaiyun's senior and far older than her, his strength was much weaker than hers. He was knocked far away by Tsar Kaiyun's casual strike, flying several thousand kilometers before stabilizing himself. On the other hand, Tsar Kaiyun stood firmly where she was, like a mountain. Her body did not even tremble, as if her attack before was a careless strike. She had also taken Bai Jian back from Tsar Vamos, trapping him before her left hand in invisible energy. "Get down and stay there," Tsar Kaiyun coldly said before throwing Bai Jian down into the huge estate of the Tsar family. Tsar Vamos was only shaken up by Tsar Tsayun's attack, so he was not injured. He immediately began to panic inside when he saw that Tsar Kaiyun wanted to protect Bai Jian, so he flew over from afar. He pleaded, "Kaiyun, do you know exactly what you are doing? Have you ever thought about what kind of disaster you would bring upon the clan with what you are doing? Have you ever thought about the clan?"
Kaiyun, stop being silly.
Bai Jian has nothing to do with our Tsar family, so just listen to your great-grandfather. Hand over Bai Jian for the clan. It's not worth it to put the entire family into jeopardy over an outsider. Tsar Kaiyun did nothing. She only coldly stared at him as a sliver of obvious resentment appeared in the depths of her eyes. She coldly said, "Do you still remember that matter all those years ago? It was because you forcefully interfered all those years ago that I separated with Hao Wu, agonizing me for my entire life. I only resent that I wasn't strong enough back then, that I could not resist the orders of you seniors, so I could only abide, but now, I am no longer the past Tsar Kaiyun. You no longer have the right or power to control what I want to do today." Tsar Vamos felt like his heart was being pierced by a needle as he listened to the cold words of Tsar Kaiyun. He painfully said, "Kaiyun, I know I was wrong about the matter all those years ago. It's me who cannot make it up to you. It was your great-grandfather who destroyed the happiness in your life, but you're still a member of the Tsar family. The blood of the Tsar family runs in your veins. Are you really willing to see the Tsar family fall into depravity? Tsar family. Tsar family. Don't come talking to me about the Tsar family. In your eyes, there's only the Tsar family." Tsar Kaiyun suddenly became agitated. She stared at Tsar Vamos with a shocking glare as pain and resentment boiled inside. She gnashed her teeth. "Since you're so afraid of me bringing trouble to the Tsar family, I, Tsar Kaiyun, will be cutting all ties with your Tsar family. From today on, anything I do will have nothing to do with the Tsar family." The experts from the Tsar family and the saint rulers of the 8 clans all had their expressions drastically change with that statement. "No, ancestor, you are a pillar of support for the Tsar family. You can't abandon us." The experts of the Tsar family all fell to their knees in the air and became torn with sorrow. "No, Kaiyun, you can't do that. You can't do that. Even with all the mistakes great-grandfather has made, you can't treat the clan like that. The clan cannot go on without you." Tsar Vamos' heart ached as tears streaked down his face. He was filled with regret. The president and grand elder of the Radiant Saint Master Union looked at each other after witnessing this. This had far exceeded anything they had imagined. Before they left, they had never thought that such a great disaster would befall the Tsar family. As the most powerful ancestor, Tsar Kaiyun had declared that she was leaving the clan. This was a devastating piece of news. Tsar Kaiyun closed her eyes in some pain. She had stayed in the Tsar family for a long time, so she had formed some attachments to it. However, she found that love was more important than the clan. In all these years, a certain estrangement has always been present between Hao Wu and me. Since Bai Jian said he can eliminate this estrangement, I am even willing to die here to eliminate it, thought Tsar Kaiyun. She then snapped open her eyes, and in that moment, her presence underwent an overwhelming change. It was no weaker than the supreme battle intent from Jian Chen as it surged into the sky. In that moment, sorrow had disappeared from her eyes. She became extremely determined. "Looks like you insist on protecting Bai Jian," snorted Jian Chen. His presence also began to skyrocket, vaguely surpassing Tsar Tsayun's. Tsar Kaiyun coldly glared as a light azure sword appeared in her hand. She said, "Jian Chen, if you want to kill Bai Jian, do it over my dead body." With that, she attacked first, stabbing out with a gentle stroke as her sword danced in her hand. The strike seemed simple, but it possessed an overwhelming level of mysteriousness. The sword seemed to be slow, but it fused with space. It had traversed the distance between them in an instant, silently arriving before Jian Chen. Chapter 1032. Fighting Tsar Kaiyun, 2. Jian Chen's gaze suddenly turned into a glare. Although Tsar Tsayun's strike did not come with an earth-shaking disturbance, it caused Jian Chen's cautiousness to greatly increase. He felt deeply threatened. Her strength had far exceeded his own. "Let me deal with her." Jian Chen called out to stop Ruijin and the others. The battle intent from him became even more powerful, and accompanying it was a surging sword chi. Tsar Kaiyun was very strong, but she was not invincible. Strands of chaotic force poured from Jian Chen's dantian. They filled up every corner of his body in an instant, pushing his chaotic body to its limits. Every strand of chaotic force was condensed from vast quantities of energy, especially since Jian Chen's chaotic body was at the third heavenly layer. A strand of it was equivalent to all the energy someone who had just stepped into Saint King could condense, which was why Jian Chen's chaotic force was used up extremely slowly when he fought. If he used it to boost his body's defense, the consumption speed would be almost negligible. The Emperor armament in Jian Chen's hand began to gently tremble, and with a gentle sword resonance, it struck out with an aura of destruction. He sent it up to receive Zar Cayun's sword without any fear. Jian Chen, your opponent is at the peak of the 8th heavenly layer and is about to enter the 9th. Be extra careful. Rui Jin's voice suddenly rang in Jian Chen's head. He had seen through Zar Cayun's strength with a single glance, which was why he warned Jian Chen. Jian Chen became even sterner. With the Emperor armament, he could only display the strength of a peak 7th heavenly layer Saint King, which was a whole level of cultivation weaker than Zar Cayun. The two of them clashed several times with lightning speed. Their collisions were extremely intense, and the activity they created was impressive. Every time their swords came into contact, it was like the collision of worlds, producing great booms and annihilating the space of the surroundings. Violent energy and fragmented sword chi would scatter in all directions, forcing all the saint rulers to continuously retreat to avoid being caught up in the battle. The City of God was one of the 7 capitals of the continent. It had existed for countless years and had experienced battles in the ancient times. However, it still existed, naturally due to its defense. At this moment, a tremendous barrier appeared in the sky above the city, blocking the sword chi and residual energy that splayed out from the battle. Its defense was nowhere on par to the one at Mercenary City, but Jian Chen and Zar Cayun's attacks were unable to shake it. At this moment, all the streets and alleys regardless of size were swarming with people. Crowds of people had even gathered on top of various structures, almost causing some roofs to cave in. All the people in the City of God stood with their heads raised to the sky as they unblinkingly observed the rare battle between shocking experts. Coupled with that was the ceaseless sound of discussions. Jian Chen quickly retreated, slightly falling into a disadvantage. Even though Zar Cayun possessed the slender physique of a female, each strike from her possessed a great might, enough to destroy the surroundings. Rui Jin, He Yu, and Hong Lian stared unblinkingly at Jian Chen. They were ready to interfere at any moment. Jian Chen was their only hope for them to reunite with their clansmen, so they viewed his life with more importance than anything else. Meanwhile, there was a quaint little wooden hut that stood on a mountain peak in an ancient mountain range several tens of thousand kilometers away from the city. Its wooden boards creaked as they were buffeted by the violent wind, as if the structure would collapse at any moment. A valiant-looking, white-robed, middle-aged man sat in the hut with his eyes closed as he cultivated. He was like an old monk, able to sit there without moving for long periods of time. Suddenly, the man's eyes snapped open. A visible light shot out from his eyes, causing the space that he stared at before him to gently tremble. The man's eyes were extremely bright as he stared in the direction of the City of God in interest. He furrowed his eyebrows slightly and softly murmured, "There's actually a fight in City of God. One of them is Cayun's presence. Just what is going on?" The middle-aged man was the same person who had ventured to the continent of the 100 races to fight a Class 8 magical beast, as well as the one who had obtained the magical beast's blood to cure the Grand Elder of the Radiant Saint Master Union. He was Hao Wu. Hao Wu sat on his wooden bed with a frown as the light in his eyes flickered. He was hesitating, struggling to come to a decision. He mumbled, "Do I go there and see or not?" After hesitating some more, he finally made up his mind. "Whatever, I just need to look while hiding from afar to see just what is happening." With that, Hao Wu disappeared. He made his way to the City of God silently at an unbelievable speed. Jian Chen and Zar Cayun's battle constantly moved away from the City of God, leaving it very soon. They arrived in a desolate mountain range 100 kilometers away and continued to fight intensely there. "Jian Chen, you're not my opponent. If you agree to spare by Jian, we can stop right now. How about that?" Zar Cayun coldly said. "I am naturally not your opponent in terms of strength, but that's not necessarily the case with swordsmanship. I will be claiming by Jian's life." There is no room for negotiating that. Jian Chen refused without any hesitation. It was impossible for him to spare by Jian. Jian Chen's arm shook violently with that. The Emperor armament became countless blurs that packed the space before him, quickly enveloping Zar Kaiyun. It was impossible to distinguish between illusion and reality with the blurs, so each blur seemed to be real. They all seemed to possess great power. This was all due to Jian Chen reaching the limits of speed. At the same time, Jian Chen used the illusory flash. He moved around Zar Kaiyun like a ghost, striking out faster and faster. Each attack possessed his full strength, equivalent to the full-powered attack from a 7th heavenly layer Saint King. Zar Kaiyun fused with the surrounding space as she calmly dodged Jian Chen's attacks. She did not use her eyes to keep track of the sword blurs, and instead she completely relied on her senses to strike out. She just happened to block the sword blurs with every strike. She coldly said, "If that's the case, do not blame me for not showing mercy." A vast energy surged from Zar Kaiyun, causing the surrounding space to twist. Zar Kaiyun raised her sword to the sky, and it immediately exploded with a dense azure light. Terrifying energy collapsed the surrounding space. Scattered flowers of a heavenly maiden. Zar Kaiyun cried out. The terrifying energy around her sword immediately exploded, turning into extremely dense sword chi that scattered in all directions. Each sword chi was no weaker than a casual strike from an 8th heavenly layer Saint King. Jian Chen's expression slightly changed. He retreated quickly with the illusory flash, using his Emperor armament to block the storm-like attacks of sword chi. The powerful force from each block would shake his arm to the point where it became numb. Freeze space. A glimmer of light flickered through Zar Kaiyun's eyes. She pointed at Jian Chen with her left hand and the space there immediately froze, trapping and immobilizing Jian Chen. Spurt. 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 With his body restrained, more than 10 powerful sword chis immediately passed through Jian Chen's body, forming the same amount of finger-sized holes. Blood immediately began to run out of the wounds. Jian Chen roared at the sky. Chaotic force immediately erupted from his body, and the Emperor armament began to shine brighter with dark light. A supreme force broke through the space, allowing him to recover his freedom. However, at this moment, Zar Kaiyun had soundlessly arrived before him. Her sword radiated a dazzling azure light as it mercilessly stabbed towards Jian Chen's throat. A sword intent countless times more pure than before began to radiate from Jian Chen at this moment. The wind and clouds immediately began to surge with its appearance, changing the weather. The surrounding air lost its usual peace under the influence of this sword intent, becoming extremely sharp, like it was filled with invisible swords. Chapter 1033. Fighting Zar Kaiyun, 3. The sudden change in Jian Chen's presence immediately led to a change in Zar Kaiyun's expression. She could not help but slightly slow down her strike heading at Jian Chen. This was all because in that moment, Zar Kaiyun seemed to feel that Jian Chen was no longer made of flesh and blood and was instead a sharp sword that stood in the world, radiating with a shocking sword chi. Zar Kaiyun felt like she was looking at a sword when she faced against Jian Chen, which shocked her greatly. Ruei Jin, He Yu, and Hong Lian all tensed up as well. They stared at Jian Chen in surprise. Thoughts similar to what Zar Kaiyun was experiencing appeared in their heads as well. The current Jian Chen did not seem like a person to them, rather a sword, a divine sword. Is this a battle skill? He Yu stared unblinkingly at Jian Chen as he murmured. The saint rulers of the 8 clans and the people from the Radiant Saint Master Union all stared at Jian Chen in shock from afar as well. Disbelief flooded their faces. In that moment, all of them held their breaths, unwilling to inhale any of the air in the surroundings since it seemed to be filled with sharp sword chi. Just a breath of it would cause piercing pain to their organs. A sliver of haziness appeared in Jian Chen's eyes, but it quickly cleared up. He seemed to have understood something right now, having obtained a grasp on something unclear. With the Emperor armament in his hand, he slowly stabbed out according to a feeling that had sprung up from nowhere in his head. Jian Chen's stroke seemed slow, but it was extremely fast. It was disillusioning. An extremely pure sword chi erupted as the sword traveled, causing the surrounding space to collapse. This was true sword chi. It was extremely sharp and acute, much mightier than sword chi condensed from power. It made people feel like it was unstoppable. As the Emperor armament struck the sword in Zar Kaiyun's hands, the sword chi actually knocked her sword away while the Emperor armament continued on with no reduction in force. It stabbed at Zar Kaiyun's chest with unstoppable momentum. Spurt. The Emperor armament stabbed into Zar Tsayun's chest, impaling her. In that moment, the sharp sword chi and destructive chaotic force wreaked havoc on Zar Tsayun's organs, turning them to mush. Zar Kaiyun groaned as she stared at the Emperor armament in her body in disbelief. He refused to believe that she could be injured by Jian Chen with her current strength. But the next moment, her left hand struck Jian Chen's chest with lightning speed. Terrifying saint force surged from her palm, breaking through the defense of Jian Chen's body with supreme power and knocking him away as he vomited blood. Meanwhile, the sword in her chest was withdrawn as Jian Chen catapulted away. Jian Chen, I never thought that you'd have a saint-tier battle skill as well. Chapter 1034. The Heavenly Enchantress?
Moor.
Zar Kaiyun consecutively struck out with all three attacks of the Way of the Tyrant's Sword. Each attack belonged to the upper levels of Saint-tier battle skills, equal to a casual strike from Saint Emperors. Even Saint Kings at great perfection would become heavily injured if the three attacks landed on them. Only a similar Saint-tier battle skill could repel it. There were also differences in power among Saint-tier battle skill. The Way of the Tyrant's blade possessed a total of 3 attacks, and each attack was more powerful than the previous one. These factors allowed it to be ranked close to the top among all Saint-tier battle skills. With Zar Tsayun's great talent, she had comprehended the mysteries of the battle skill to the limit, and she had also reached great proficiency with its use. Her strength at the peak of the 8th heavenly layer combined perfectly with the Saint-tier battle skill allowed her to use the skill to its full potential. Jian Chen became extremely stern. The battle skill's vast pressure tightly locked onto his entire body, which caused him to feel like he was submerged in mud. Every action felt difficult. The Saint artifact had been knocked away. Although it quickly flew toward him through his mental connection, it would not be able to make it. Looks like I can only use the Octaterra Divine Hall, Jian Chen thought. The Octaterra Divine Hall was in ruins, but Zar Tsayun's Saint-tier battle skill was only a casual strike from a Saint Emperor. Its strength was nowhere Kaiser's punch, so the Divine Hall could easily block the strike despite its state. Suddenly, figure flashed before him just as Jian Chen wanted to bring out the Divine Hall. Rue Jin had appeared silently before Jian Chen, while the sacred dragon's sword in his hand radiated with a terrifying presence. Slivers of origin energy slowly pulsed and radiated with a profound aura. Rue Jin stood like a steel wall before Jian Chen. As he swung out with his sword, an extremely powerful sword chi immediately shot out toward Zar Kaiyun with a devastating might. The second sword chi from Zar Kaiyun collided with the sword chi from the sacred dragon's sword and immediately produced a deafening boom. The giant sword chi seemed as fragile as tofu and dispersed without much difficulty at all. Rue Jin's sacred dragon's sword contained origin energy, so when he used it to send out a sword chi, it would possess a sliver of origin energy as well. This was a power that surpassed Saint Emperors, something that belonged to a completely different level. Its strength was beyond suspicion, something incomparable to the powers of this world. The attack from the sacred dragon's sword tore through the other attack like a hot knife through butter. Then, it continued towards Zar Tsayun's third attack with no reduction in force. Zar Tsayun's expression suddenly changed when she sensed the power of Rue Jin's attack. She extended a finger and immediately, the countless sword chi created from the third move changed in trajectory and formed a straight line. They all charged toward Rue Jin's sword chi with origin energy. With consecutive booms, Rue Jin's sword chi charged through all the sword chi like a wild beast with stoppable momentum. It caused the smaller sword chi to explode as soon as they made contact. They turned it into surging energy of the world that dispersed in the surroundings. Rue Jin's single sword chi from the Radiant Dragon's sword broke through 2 attacks from Zar Tsayun's Saint-tier battle skill. In the end, it passed through her chest and disappeared into the horizon. Zar Tsayun's body trembled violently as agony filled her face. Her presence quickly began to decrease, and she began to fall out of the sky like a broken kite.
Kaiyun.
A cry rang out from afar. Hao Wu had shot over as a blur with lightning speed as he fused with the surrounding space. He firmly caught Zar Kaiyun. Then, he wanted to flee into the distance.
Leave this person behind.
Jian Chen did not know Hao Wu. He immediately cried out when he saw that someone wanted to save Zar Kaiyun. As such, he used the illusory flash and arrived before the unknown individual in an instant. His emperor armament transformed into a streak of black light as it stabbed mercilessly toward Zar Kaiyun. A 3 fingers wide sword immediately appeared in Hao Wu's hands. It shone with an earthen yellow light, as it stabbed out like a lightning bolt. 8th Heavenly Layer Saint King. Jian Chen could sense Hao Wu's strength once he lashed out. It was actually at the same cultivation level as Zar Kaiyun, just slightly weaker than her as it was not at the peak. Just as Hao Wu's sword was about to collide with the Emperor armament, the space 1,000 meters away began to twist violently. Vaguely, the rippling space seemed to form a huge zither 1,000 meters long, with 36 clearly visible strings. Ding! The strings began to tremble slowly, and produced a gentle note of the zither. A transparent musical note that seemed to be formed from the surrounding space flew out. Then, it simultaneously collided with Jian Chen's Emperor armament and Hao Wu's Saint weapon with unbelievable speed. Clang! An extremely powerful sound wave erupted when the musical note collided with the Emperor armament and Saint weapon. It seemed to be able to shake up one's soul, shocking people's eardrums into temporary deafness. The terrifying sound wave caused the minds of the Saint rulers who watched from afar to blank out as if their souls were gone. Jian Chen and Hao Wu's arms shook, and the force knocked their swords aside. The powerful force actually almost knocked the Emperor armament out of Jian Chen's hand. At the same time, the terrifying sound wave turned into an invisible pushing force, so powerful that none of them could resist. It separated Jian Chen and Hao Wu, stopping them from fighting. Just as zither condensed from space could nullify the attacks of 2 great Saint Kings with a single note. Its power far exceeded anyone's imaginations. Jian Chen and Hao Wu did not continue their fight. They turned around to look at the zither, as it slowly dispersed. Disbelief flooded their eyes. "It's the Heavenly Enchantress," Jian Chen murmured, as his heart began to churn. He recognized the zither condensed from space. It was the Heavenly Enchantress zither of the demonic cry. The appearance was the same. It had the same amount of strings and made the same sound. There was no one else in the world who could play the zither like that other than the Heavenly Enchantress. However, he had not imagined that the Heavenly Enchantress' strength would rise to such an unbelievable level after just a few years, which shocked Jian Chen greatly. Hao Wu carried Zar Kaiyun, as he levitated in the sky. He stared blankly at the zither, and his emotions became extremely mixed. Pain was present in his gaze. Muer, is it you?" Hao Wu called out gently, but it resounded through a radius of several dozen kilometers. His voice trembled as it was filled with emotions. Muer. Jian Chen immediately became shocked when he heard Hao Wu's words. Does he know the Heavenly Enchantress? Muer. Is that the Heavenly Enchantress name? The zither in the sky finally dispersed completely, but the Heavenly Enchantress never showed up. No one knew where she was. Was she still hiding or had she left long ago? Tears pooled up in Hao Wu's eyes. He stared painfully at the spot that the zither had vanished from and sorrowfully said, "Muer, since you've come, why don't you want to come out and see your dad? It's been so long. Are you still unwilling to forgive Dad?" Dad. Jian Chen was shocking inside when he heard that. He turned to Hao Wu suddenly and stared at him fixedly. Surprise filled his face, as he doubted what he had just heard in that moment. Is that middle-aged man the father of the Heavenly Enchantress? Jian Chen was filled with disbelief, and he was unable to return to his senses. However, if that were the case, it would give an even better explanation to why the Heavenly Enchantress would secretly interfere. Rui Jin, Hong Lian, and He Yu also stared sternly at the space where the zither had disappeared. They remained silent. That little girl has become so powerful. She is actually able to move around tracelessly. Even I can't sense her presence. A while later, He Yu sighed emotionally. When we met her several years ago on Dragon Island, she was still a saint ruler. How did she become so powerful? Was she always hiding her strength before? If that's really the case, then her ability to conceal her abilities is just too great, Rui Jin murmured. He was still confused after much thought. That person is very powerful. Just a single note is enough for my soul to tremble. Do you recognize her? Hong Lian stared fixedly on the space where the zither had vanished. She was extremely stern. Rui Jin nodded and replied, I've met her before. She was with Jian Chen at that time. She uses the zither as a weapon and uses sound to fight people. She walks an extremely rare path of cultivation, but I just never thought that she will become so powerful. Hao Wu. Zar Kaiyun stared at Hao Wu emotionally, as he carried her. she called out gently.
Her purple dress had already become dyed red with blood, which made her seem extremely miserable. Hao Wu lowered his head to look at her. His expression became mixed. Kaiyun, how are you? Are you heavily injured? Hao Wu's voice was filled with concern. Zar Kaiyun shook her head gently, as tears ran down her cheek. Her voice was filled with tenderness and injustice. Hao Wu, 3,000 years. After 3 whole thousand years, you're finally willing to come see me. Do you know how painful it has been in those years as I waited for you? Hao Wu painfully closed his eyes. His heart ached, and he said, Kain, you're so silly. I'm not worth it for you to be like that. It's me who did not have the right to see you. It's me who can't make it up to you. I was the one who failed to live up to you. Zar Kaiyun shook her head gently, as she said weakly. Hao Wu, did you know that although you've once made me suffer so much pain that I would be better off dead, I've never hated you. I knew the clan secretly organized it all. You only fell to the schemes of the seniors of my clan, suffering because of them. I only resented the seniors and only blamed them. I never blamed you. Hao Wu, did you know that I've always been waiting for you these years, waiting for you to apologize to me and beg for my forgiveness? It's a pity that my wish never came true. I waited painfully for you for 3,000 years, yet you didn't even want to come see me. Heartbreak filled Zar Kaiyun's voice. Chapter 1035. Zar Kaiyun's feelings. After Zar Kaiyun buried her feelings in her heart for so long, they finally exploded without restraint. Her bone-piercing tenderness, and her unchangeable stubbornness deeply moved Hao Wu's heart and caused it to tremble. Kaiyun, it was me who has no right to see you. I have no right to see you. I'm the one who can't make it up to you. It's me. Hao Wu sobbed painfully with his eyes closed, as sorrow filled his face as well. Bright blood constantly flowed from the corner of Zar Kaiyun's mouth. She slowly raised her jade-white hand and gently touched Hao Wu's weathered face. Her eyes were no longer as cold and emotionless as before. Instead, tenderness filled her eyes. She said softly, Hao Wu, I don't blame you. I've never blamed you, nor have I been mad at you. Because back then, before my family, you had no power to resist. Even I could not avoid the arrangements of my family. But it's different now. We both possess great strength now. We both have the authority to speak and make decisions before the clan. Hao Wu, did you know that I longed for you in every moment of those years, longing to be with you, to spend our days freely like before and living by the sword? Are you willing to be with me now? Zar Kaiyun stared stubbornly at Hao Wu, as anticipation filled her. At that moment, the sky became abnormally silent. Other than the wild wind, there was only Hao Wu and Zar Kaiyun's voice. All the saint rulers from the 8 clans flew over. They stood silently in the distance, as they watched everything unfold. All of their expressions were extremely mixed, while quite a few of them stared fixedly at Zar Kaiyun. Very few of the people among them knew about Zar Kaiyun's past. They all found it extremely unbelievable that their most powerful ancestors' love for Hao Wu was so deep, and that it did not change even after several thousand years. Zar Vamos stood with the many saint rulers of the Zar family, as they stared at the two of them with mixed emotions. Deep regret was present. Back then, they had ignored the painful pleas of Zar Kaiyun and forcefully separated the two of them. This was because Hao Wu was just a slightly talented mercenary. He drifted through the continent without a definite residency, and did not possess any background. How could someone like that catch the eyes of the Zar family that controlled one of the 7 capitals of the city? Meanwhile, Zar Kaiyun was the most outstanding person of the family. She was talented, clever and a devastating beauty. The previous ancestor of the clan viewed her as a treasure of the clan. They loved her dearly, but how could they let such an impressive clan member marry a mercenary that did not even have a home? As a result, a series of matters followed. However, the Zar family had never thought that the mercenary who could only be considered as slightly talented would actually have such great potential. He became one of the few supreme experts of the continent after several thousand years and became an existence that the Zar family needed to treat with importance. However, the Zar family had just committed too many things that could not be made up to Hao Wu. With the mistakes already committed, it was extremely difficult for them to avoid the consequences, which was why Hao Wu had always stayed in the Holy Empire. However, his relationship with the Zar family was ambiguous. It was uncertain whether it was hostile or not.
Also, Tsar Vamos knew that with Hao Wu's connections, he possessed the power to take revenge against the Tsar family many years ago. However, he never did it, all because of Tsar Kaiyun.
Jian Chen put away his emperor armament and hovered in the sky without any presence like an ordinary person.
He stared quietly at the two of them as mixed emotions filled his eyes. The light in his eyes flickered, as he was thinking of something. Rui Jin, Hong Lian, He Yu, and the four protectors of the Bloodsword sect silently stood with Jian Chen. Hao Wu closed his eyes painfully once more, as he listened to Tsar Kaiyun. He did not reply even after a very long time. Tsar Kaiyun stared at him for a very long time, before she became dejected. Tears rolled uncontrollably down her cheeks. Hao Wu, I know you still love me. You've always loved me, right? Hao Wu nodded his head gently without saying anything. The main reason why you're unwilling to be with me is because of your daughter, right? You're afraid that your daughter will never forgive you, right? Asked Tsar Kaiyun's in a pained voice. I'm sorry, Kaiyun. Hao Wu rubbed Kaiyun's cheeks gently as pain filled his heart. Clearly, he had always been deeply in love with Tsar Kaiyun, but he could not be with his lover due to certain reasons. He had not even met her in 3,000 years. Tsar Kaiyun's lips curled into a smile, as she slowly closed her eyes in a satisfied manner. She said gently, Hao Wu, I may not be able to be with you, but I am already very satisfied to be able to feel your embrace once more. With that, her body suddenly jolted. Immediately, blood sprayed from her mouth. She also began to pale, and her expression became horrible. She was close to death. Hao Wu's expression greatly changed. His eyes snapped open in that instant, as he stared at Tsar Kaiyun in disbelief. He cried out, Kaiyun, what are you doing? You've severed your meridians to your heart. Why are you so muddle-headed? Since living means pain, I might as well just die. It'll be better than suffering every day. Hao Wu, I hope we can meet again in our future lives. Tsar Kaiyun's face was ashen. She wanted to die now and did not desire to continue living. Afterward, a faint ball of flames emerged from Tsar Kaiyun's head. She was currently using a secret technique to burn her soul. Kaiyun, don't do this, Hao Wu paled in fright. He became stunned as everything had occurred just too suddenly. Kaiyun, stop. Tsar Vamos also paled, as he cried out in a panic. Ancestor, the saint rulers all became shocked as well, as they called out sorrowfully. Jian Chen's expression also changed slightly, as he stood from afar. He turned to Rui Jin and said, Senior Rui Jin, please stop her. Rui Jin nodded and silently arrived before Tsar Kaiyun. He directly struck toward her head with his palm. Don't harm Kaiyun. Hao Wu thought that Rui Jin wanted to kill Tsar Kaiyun. He immediately tried to block the attack, as he cried out. If you don't want her soul wiped out, don't interfere, Rui Jin growled. His left hand changed between seals, and he immediately cast a secret technique of the Dragon Clan to immobilize Hao Wu. His right palm continued mercilessly towards Tsar Kaiyun's head. Rui Jin immediately extinguished the flames on her head, and her soul stopped burning. Rui Jin had forcefully obstructed her suicide attempt, but her soul was greatly injured. She became unconscious. Hao Wu recovered his freedom very quickly. He retreated hastily with Tsar Kaiyun in his arms, and he pulled far away from Rui Jin. He stared at Tsar Kaiyun in panic, as he constantly shook her. Kaiyun, what has happened to you? What has happened to you? Tsar Vamos also arrived before Hao Wu. His expression was filled with sorrow, as he stared painfully at the unconscious Tsar Kaiyun. He was filled with regret over the decision he had made all those years ago. Her soul is currently extremely heavily injured, and she has fallen conscious. Coupled with the fact that she only wants to die, it'll be impossible for her to wake up in a short amount of time, Rui Jin said nonchalantly, as he stared deeply at Tsar Kaiyun. Chapter 1036. Meeting Yongling again, 1. Kaiyun, you're so muddle-headed. You really are so muddle-headed. Why did you do something like this? Why? Hao Wu was torn with grief. He touched Tsar Kaiyun's pale face with his coarse hand. His heart ached. Tsar Vamos' face was streaked with tears. He too was in great sorrow when he saw the pained state of his great-granddaughter since she was like this due to him.
It was because of the matter all those years ago that led to the horrible relationship between him and Czar Kaiyun.
Sigh, I regret, Czar Vamos said painfully. Czar Tsayun's state would severely affect the power of the clan. Kaiyun, wake up. Quickly wake up. I'll take you back home, to the home that belongs to us. We'll live the life we once had. Hao Wu murmured quietly since he wanted to wake her up.
However, Czar Tsayun's eyes did not even twitch, as if she had not heard him at all.
Hao Wu, give Kaiyun to me. The Czar family will use everything we have to save her, Czar Vamos said to Hao Wu. A sharp light immediately flickered through Hao Wu's sorrowful gaze when he heard that. He stared at Czar Vamos in resentment and coldly said, Czar Vamos, think about what you did all those years ago. What dignity do you have left to take Kaiyun from me? You don't even have that right.
Czar Vamos, if it weren't for Kaiyun, did you really think that your Czar family would have been able to be as carefree as it is now?
Hao Wu's words were like drenching Czar Vamos in cold water. His entire body became cold as he stood there blankly. His soul seemed to have left his body. Then, Hao Wu looked at Jian Chen. He quickly glanced past Rui Jin and He Yu from the corner of his eyes. A sliver of fear appeared in the depths of his eyes as he said, Jian Chen, Kaiyun is no longer a member of the Czar family. Now that she has fallen into such a miserable state, I hope you can wipe the slate between you and her. Any matters of the Czar family have nothing to do with. Does that satisfy you? Jian Chen's expression was extremely mixed. He slowly nodded and said, Senior Hao Wu, allow me to ask you one question. What is your relationship with the Heavenly Enchantress? Although Jian Chen had already guessed that Hao Wu was her father, he wanted to confirm it. Hao Wu's face immediately darkened with that. He said dejectedly, She's my daughter, but she does not recognize me as her father. Hao Wu became filled with pain when Jian Chen mentioned the Heavenly Enchantress. His heart ached. Although he had known it would be like this beforehand, Jian Chen still gasped inside after he learned this news from Hao Wu personally. Jian Chen calmed down very quickly. He slowly flew to Hao Wu's side and stared at the unconscious Czar Kaiyun with mixed feelings. After hesitating slightly, Jian Chen slowly closed his eyes. Immediately, a ball of extremely dense milky white light began to radiate from Jian Chen. It encased his entire body and obscured his appearance. Jian Chen seemed to have become a radiant god that was bathing in the light. His stern expression was filled with a divine awe, as if he could not be impinged upon. This is the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force. I never thought he had already reached the 7th class. The president and grand elder of the Radiant Saint Master Union both cried out when they saw this. They were astounded. Although Jian Chen had taken away the saint artifact of the Union, it was not easy for a Class 6 Radiant Saint Master to become a Class 7 Radiant Saint Master. It was definitely unprecedented on the continent for someone at Jian Chen's age to reach the 7th class. He really is a prodigy. Though it's a pity, the president shook his head as he sighed. Pity flooded his face. Jian Chen had personally used the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force to heal Czar Kaiyun. His decision regarding Czar Kaiyun was displayed through this action. Although he and the Heavenly Enchantress were not married, matters that only occurred after marriage had happened between them. The Heavenly Enchantress was Hao Wu's daughter while Hao Wu and Czar Kaiyun were deeply in love with each other. Their deep affection had moved Jian Chen. Jian Chen had no idea just what had happened between the three of them to cause such a complicated situation, but just from their relationship on the surface, Jian Chen was certain of his choice. If he continued his attempts on Czar Tsayun's life, Hao Wu would definitely fight him to the death. His relationship with Hao Wu would also become one of hostility, which was not something Jian Chen wanted to see. Also, the Heavenly Enchantress had secretly prevented the battle between the two of them just as they were about to clash. Perhaps, the Heavenly Enchantress did not want to see her father fight with Jian Chen in such a life-or-death fashion. He had learned from Hao Wu that the Heavenly Enchantress had never recognized him as a father, but they were still father and daughter after all. The wound from Rui Jin's sacred dragon sword was rather severe. The powerful origin energy had devoured her flesh and formed a fist-sized hole, but with the regenerative properties of Radiant Saint Force origin energy, Jian Chen only needed a single strand to completely heal Czar Kaiyun. However, she did not awaken. Jian Chen's actions greatly moved Hao Wu, and he constantly thanked Jian Chen. He knew Jian Chen's background very well. Jian Chen was someone that even the 10 protector clans were helpless against. Moreover,
He was followed by two extremely powerful experts that even human and magical beast Saint Emperors could do nothing but flee against.
However, Hao Wu had no idea about the connection between Jian Chen and his daughter even now. I've healed all her wounds with my radiant saint force.
Though I am helpless when it comes to the injuries of her soul.
Jian Chen gently sighed. I will find ways to cure Caiyun's injuries of the soul. It's me who can't make it up to her as well as me who caused her to become like this. I will use the rest of my life to make it up properly to Caiyun. Hao Wu focused his attention on Czar Caiyun's face. Then, he left with her in his arms. He disappeared into the horizon very quickly.
Caiyun!
Czar Vamos sorrowfully cried out as he stared blankly in the direction she had disappeared in. He was filled with worry and a deep unwillingness to part with her. At this moment, more and more saint rulers hurried over from the surroundings. They watched from afar. They had all been drawn over by the great battle earlier. Jian Chen casually glanced past the empty space up ahead. His soul was extremely powerful, so he could clearly feel the saint kings hiding there. Within them included the ancestor of the Kara clan. Jian Chen was no longer in the mood to settle his disagreements with the 8 clans and the Czar family after what had happened with Hao Wu.
He coldly said to the people of the 8 clans, I will not pursue the matter of you heavily injuring me all those years ago because of Senior Hao Wu.
You may have escaped death, but you have not escaped punishment. With that, all the saint rulers of the 8 clans relaxed. All of them revealed expressions of relief, like they had just escaped a disaster. What they feared the most was Jian Chen taking revenge for what had happened all those years ago, since they would be helpless if he actually took action. Jian Chen, my Qing family is filled with deep regret regarding what we did to you all those years ago. To thank you for not killing me, I will heavily injure myself as the price. To give brother Jian Chen an explanation, the saint ruler of the Cheng family spoke first. He then punched himself in the chest.
Blood sprayed from his mouth into the air as he became heavily injured.
Afterward, the other saint rulers of the 8 clans all heavily injured themselves as well.
They were paying the price for what they did all those years ago as well as giving Jian Chen an explanation and thanking him for not killing them.
This scene caused a great discussion to break out among those who were watching. They all began to whisper to one another.
The enmity between Jian Chen and the 8 clans from all those years ago could be considered to have reached a complete conclusion.
Although Hao Wu and Czar Caiyun disrupted Jian Chen's plans and made him deviate from them, it still could be considered a perfect conclusion. Then, Jian Chen arrived before the group of people from the Radiant Saint Master Union after he dealt with the 8 clans. He clasped his hands and said with mixed emotions, Jian Chen greets the President and the Grand Elder. Jian Chen, come visit the headquarters of our union whenever you have the time. There are some matters I want to discuss with you. The president spoke as well. Jian Chen knew that the president wanted to talk about the saint artifact, so he did not decline. He agreed, President, I'll go with you to the union after I deal with the matters here. The president also began to smile from the bottom of his heart as he nodded many times. Jian Chen used the illusory flash to move, and his steps became blurs. With every casual footstep, he would traverse several kilometers. Although Jian Chen did not go ahead and comprehend it purposefully, he had become more and more proficient with it after using the special movement battle skill many times. His grasp of it was currently improving unconsciously. After around a dozen steps, Jian Chen had traversed over 100 kilometers. He had returned to the City of God. The barrier around the city had disappeared as well. It had returned to its previous state. Rui Jin, He Yu, Hong Lian, and the 4 protectors of the Bloodsword sect followed behind Jian Chen.
Behind them were Czar Vamos and the saint rulers of the 8 clans, as well as the various experts who had come to watch.
Jian Chen hovered over the City of God and directly flew to the mansion of the Czar family. Bai Jian remained in the huge estate, standing there in the same position as before. Panic flooded his face. Czar Vamos had frozen Bai Jian before, which had immobilized him. Although Czar Caiyun had snatched him away later, she did not remove the force that trapped in place, so all he could do was stand there obediently. He could not even flee even when he wanted to. Bai Jian, I'd like to see who will be saving you now. Jian Chen stared icily at Bai Jian. Powerful killing intent radiated from Jian Chen without any restraint. It caused the surrounding temperature to plummet. Bai Jian's expression immediately changed when he saw Jian Chen return safe and sound.
He became absolutely horrified, and fear flooded his face. Don't kill me, Jian Chen. Don't kill me. I am great friends with the Heavenly Enchantress. If you kill me, the Heavenly Enchantress will never forgive you. She will hate you for the rest of her life, Bai Jian said with a trembling voice. He had already become pale white since he knew he was facing the moment of his death. Bai Jian, if it were not for the experts of the Chongyang clan arriving in time for the matter of Flame City, all my good friends probably would have died by your hands, and I have even heard that you were interested in my fiancé, Yu, right? Jian Chen's gaze became even colder as killing intent boiled in his heart. No, that's not true, Jian Chen. That's not true. It's all a misunderstanding. Bai Jian paled in fright. He frantically denied the accusations and wanted to explain himself. Jian Chen was not convinced at all. According to your request many years ago, we have been devoting all our efforts in finding items that can store the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force. We've gathered quite a few, and they're all in this space ring. I hope you can help us collect some more origin energy the next time the seal of the artifact loosens, the president pleaded. He knew that the existence of the current union would all be up to Jian Chen. If the union lost its source of Radiant Saint Force origin energy, it would no longer have the power to gather all the high-class Radiant Saint Masters of the continent. Jian Chen accepted the space ring. President, don't worry. I will definitely store enough origin energy for you the next time the seal loosens. I will be able to relax if that's the case. The president and the Grand Elder both became relieved. Their thumping hearts calmed down, and they became much more at ease. Jian Chen pondered in silence as he sat in the chair. Reminiscence filled his eyes. Scenes of when he was in the City of God as a Class 6 Radiant Saint Master flashed through his head again. At that moment, he remembered his bodyguard back then, Yang Ling. That fellow was even willing to throw his own life away to protect Jian Chen. There was also that chatterbox, Quan Yu Kai, who always stuck to him in an attempt to obtain the radiant arts. Yang Ling loyalty had once moved Jian Chen deeply. Although he was just a bodyguard, Jian Chen had never treated him as an outsider during the time he spent with him. He treated him as a friend, even though he was just a Heaven Saint Master. President, Grand Elder, may I meet my bodyguard from back then, Yang Ling? Jian Chen asked. It was impossible for the president to not fulfill Jian Chen's small request. He immediately sent people to contact Yang Ling. Then, he smiled and said, there were 2 people of the top 10 from last time who succeeded a little in fusing with the origin energy. One of them was the chosen daughter of the Kara clan, Kara Liwei. The other was Quan Yu Kai, who you once knew. Quan Youtsai's talent is pretty impressive as well, possessing the potential to reach Class 7, so I assigned Yang Ling to protect him. Chapter 1038. Kara Liwei. Jian Chen had no idea how he should react when he heard this news. They had not seen each other for so many years, yet Quan Yu Kai was actually with Yang Ling. Quan Yu Kai is shameless and feels unreliable sometimes. He would stick to me all the time and constantly chatter without end. While Yang Ling's a quiet person. He's simple and honest, so it sure would be interesting if the 2 of them are together, Jian Chen thought inside. Very soon, the burly Yang Ling was brought over by some people, and following him was the white-robed Quan Yu Kai, who bore a detailed blue badge on his chest. Oh wow, Brother Yang Yuqian, it really is you. When I heard the elders say that Brother Yang Yuqian had come back for vengeance with the 8 clans, I didn't believe it at first, but it really is you now that I've seen you again. Quan Youtsai's eyes immediately lit up when he saw Jian Chen. Joy filled his face, and he shot over to Jian Chen's side as if he had not even seen the president and Grand Elder. He walked around Jian Chen as he examined him, asking in disbelief, Brother Yang Yuqian, the elders can't be right, can they? Have you really come back to find revenge with the 8 clans? And that intense battle that just happened in the sky of the city can't have been you, right? The president furrowed his brows when he saw how Quan Yu Kai behaved. He chastised with a deep voice, Quan Yu Kai, do not be impolite to Brother Jian Chen. Ah, teacher, Grand Elder, the 2 of you are here as well. Quan Yu Kai greets teacher and the Grand Elder. Quan Yu Kai only just seemed to have noticed the presence of the president and Grand Elder. He immediately stopped acting in such a joking manner and greeted the 2 of them courteously. After failing to fuse with the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force, he was taken on as a student of the president. However, his identity was nowhere near as great as Jian Chen and Yun Tian from before, who were disciples of the president. His relationship with the president was more akin to teacher and student. Xueqi admired the president and Grand Elder greatly inside. He immediately became well-behaved before the two of them, standing to one side obediently and quietly. He would always stare at Jian Chen, wanting to say something but holding back while the president and Grand Elder were present. Jian Chen also became cheerful when he saw his acquaintances of the past. Although Xueqi and Yang Ling could not be considered life-and-death comrades, they were still friends that had once accompanied him. Xueqi, let's talk about the old days later. Jian Chen smiled at Xueqi as he stood there obediently. Xueqi nodded firmly. He only gave a small reply, and did not say anything else as he glanced at the president and Grand Elder in an annoyed manner. Jian Chen looked to Yang Ling. He examined him in detail. After being separated for 10 years, Yang Ling was exactly the same as before with no changes whatsoever. Yang Ling, it's been several years since we last met. How have you been in those years? Jian Chen smiled. Yang Ling's gaze toward Jian Chen was slightly mixed. He then clasped his hands at Jian Chen courteously. Yang Ling greets the esteemed Master Yang Yutian. I thank Master Yang Yutian for your concern. Yang Ling has been very well in the past few years. Yang Ling, you can just call me Jian Chen. Jian Chen is my real name, said Jian Chen. Yes, Master Jian Chen. Yang Ling clasped his hands as he replied. He was just as polite as before. Jian Chen sat back on a large comfy couch as he stared at Yang Ling in interest. He said steadily, Yang Ling, have you ever hated me? Jian Chen treated Yang Ling with great importance. Yang Ling's status in Jian Chen's heart had far exceeded Quan Youtsai's, or even a few ordinary friends. Back then on the ferry on Fragrance River, he faced the assassination attempt of the 8 clans. Yang Ling was even willing to sacrifice his own life to protect Jian Chen and let him flee, which deeply touched Jian Chen. Yang Ling dares not. Yang Ling completely treated himself as a servant, possessing no pride as a heaven saint master. He spoke extremely politely. Yang Ling, do you still remember my promise back then? I once said to you that I will help you out given the chance. I will be following through with what I said now. Are you willing to follow me and become a saint ruler? Jian Chen swore. He was extremely confident in allowing Yang Ling reach saint ruler. Yang Ling's eyes immediately lit up when he heard about becoming a saint ruler. He ravished with joy, but the light in his eyes soon darkened. He glanced at the president of the union. The president chuckled, Yang Ling, to be able to follow brother Jian Chen would be the greatest fortune you will ever come across in your life. Why don't you hurry to thank brother Jian Chen? I believe you'll be very successful in the future with brother Jian Chen's help and become a supreme expert. Yang Ling behaved like he had just been pardoned from a crime. He became emotional and clasped his hands courteously to Jian Chen. I thank Master Jian Chen's kindness very much. Brother Jian Chen, we'll give Yang Ling to you. From now on, he is your person. The union will no longer interfere with anything he does. The president expressed his position on Jian Chen once again. With Jian Chen's current status and strength, the union could only obediently abide even if he wanted to take someone away from the union. At that moment, a purple-badged elder walked into the room carrying an embroidered box. He directly made his way to the president and said, President, I have brought you the item you want from the treasury. The president accepted the box from the elder and then slowly opened it. 3 white, fist-sized rocks lay peacefully inside. They were all cubes and were transparent, like some type of high-quality jade. Brother Jian Chen, these 3 rocks are known to us as flaming jadeite. It's an extremely rare rock on the continent and cannot be found easily. Each piece is invaluable and extremely hard to find or purchase within the markets. The rock can store energy, and the power of the energy it can store depends on its quality. If a 9th heavenly layer saint ruler poured his power into it, even an ordinary person would be able to unleash a strike from a 9th heavenly layer saint ruler with a rock. This would apply to saint kings as well. The 3 flaming jadeites in my hand right now are of the highest quality and are completely able to store the power from a saint king at great perfection. Brother Jian Chen is someone with a family, so I'd like to gift these 3 rocks to brother Jian Chen hoping that it can help out brother Jian Chen a little. The president brought the box before Jian Chen before passing it to him. Jian Chen could not help but think back to when he first took part in the competition within the artifact spirit after hearing the president's explanations. A Class 6 Radiant Saint Master of the Tsar family had brought in a wondrous rock from outside and used it to dish out the strike of a Saint King. By the looks of it, the rock should have been a flaming jadeite that the president had just told him about. I thank the president for his grand gift. Jian Chen did not turn it down. He happily accepted the 3 rocks. The rocks could store the power of Saint Kings at great perfection, which meant that even ordinary people could produce a strike equal to Saint Kings at great perfection with the rock given that someone had poured energy into it beforehand. This was a valuable treasure to Jian Chen. Jian Chen stayed at the Union for 1 whole day. He spoke a lot with the president and grand elder and had even mentioned Yun Tian in their conversations. However, Jian Chen learned that Yun Tian had disappeared. Even when they used a secret technique to scour the continent, they failed to find his tracks. By the time Jian Chen left the Union, the sun had already set and darkness had descended, filling the entire world. Everything had been blanketed by the darkness of night. Brother Jian Chen, it's been 10 years since we last met, and who knows how long it will be until we meet again. Tonight, everything will be on me. I'd like to invite you to the most famous ferry of Fragrance River. Will brother give me that honor? Quan Yu Kai laughed. He had returned to his jolly mood like before once he left the Union. Jian Chen did not turn down Quan Yotsai's suggestion. He took a horse carriage to Fragrance River outside the city with Quan Yu Kai and the silent Yang Ling, as well as He Yu and Hong Lian. Rui Jin, on the other hand, had entered the saint artifact with the flaming jadeites Jian Chen had obtained from the president to pour energy into them. Meanwhile, the 4 protectors of the Blood Sword sect had been dismissed by Jian Chen. Jian Chen could not help but close his eyes as he sat in the rocky carriage. In that moment, his heart had become tranquil, which rarely happened. He felt like he had returned to before, back to when he was an esteemed Class 6 Radiant Saint Master. That night, Quan Yu Kai had paid the price. He booked the most famous ferry of Fragrance River, costing him several 100,000 crystal coins. However, that was nothing to a Class 6 Radiant Saint Master. The ferry rode through the wind and waves at night as gentle music played. Floating on the river, the 2 banks danced with lamplight as the sound of activity buzzed. This was the liveliest place every night, the place where aristocrats would gather. On the deck, Jian Chen, Quan Yu Kai, and Yang Ling toasted and drank heartily. They talked about everything while even the cat-sized white tiger had been let out of the artifact spirit. It was currently tasting and eating the various delicacies on the table. Yu Yu remained in the artifact space, using many low-class magical beasts to increase her strength. She possessed the secret protection of the artifact spirit, so Jian Chen did not worry about any dangers that would threaten her life. He Yu and Hong Lian had followed Jian Chen along, but they had no interest in participating in something like this with their age. They sat at the rear of the ship as they rested with their eyes closed. A white strike of light tore through the dark night sky, traveling to the ferry where Jian Chen was. Afterward, it slowly landed on the deck. Jian Chen, Quan Yu Kai, and Yang Ling all looked at the uninvited person. It was an alluring beauty in a white dress who seemed to be in her 20s. Yang Yutian, you've disappeared for 10 years. You've finally decided to come back. The beauty smiled gracefully as she made her way elegantly up to Jian Chen. I never thought that it would actually be Miss Kara Li Wei. Even after so many years, Miss Li Wei is still as beautiful as before with no change through the years. Jian Chen smiled back at the lady. She was the young lady of the Kara clan, Kara Li Wei. Chapter 1039. The divine hall hidden at the bottom of the river Kara Li Wei arrived before Jian Chen with her eyes shining. She smiled. 10 years have passed in the blink of an eye. Your temperament has undergone a huge change. It is like you're a completely new person. Yang Yutian, 10 years later, I am still the me from before, while you have stopped being your past self long ago. Reminiscence clouded her beautiful eyes, as she seemed to recollect everything in the past. Jian Chen smiled silently at Kara Li Wei's words, and he replied, Miss Li Wei really does like to joke. It may be 10 years since we last met, but I am still my old self, even if my status and strength differ from before. Quan Yu Kai and Yang Ling drank together. They understood what was going on, so they excluded Jian Chen and refused to talk to him. However, they would glance at Jian Chen and Kara Li Wei at times, purposefully or otherwise. Really? Kara Li Wei smiled. She extended her slender white fingers and poured wine into an empty cup on the table. Then, she glanced at Jian Chen and said, "Since the current Yang Yutian is still the former Yang Yutian, do you still remember that in the artifact space, I saved you once?" "Of course, I remember. At that time, I was caught in a tight encirclement within the artifact space. It was all because Miss Li Wei arrived in time. You kept a portion of enemies busy, which allowed me enough time to cast Judgment Sword and change the situation," Jian Chen said with a smile. "Then, how do you intend on paying me back for assisting you all those years ago?" Her eyes glowed with an alluring light as she stared unblinkingly at Jian Chen's weathered face. She slightly smiled. "When the seal of the Saint artifact loosens in 40 years, I will do everything I can to assist Miss Li Wei in breaking through. Does this satisfy Miss Li Wei? I hope the esteemed Yang Yutian does not break his promise and upsets me." Kara Li Wei quietly responded in a delicate and touching fashion. Afterward, she raised her cup to Jian Chen and said, "Come, Yang Yutian. I want to toast you a cup for my successful breakthrough to Class 7 in 40 years' time." Kara Li Wei brought the cup of wine close to Jian Chen's lips. She stared at him with a slight flush on her beautiful face. Jian Chen had even caught a whiff of her faint fragrance from her fingers. The smell was intoxicating. Kara Li Wei was a beauty that outshined the moon. If Jian Chen did not possess a tough mental fortitude, he would have let down his guard long ago. Jian Chen chuckled as he accepted the cup of wine from Kara Li Wei. Then, he downed it completely. "Yang Yutian, is the wine good?" Kara Li Wei suddenly asked, as her eyes continued to shine. "This wine is valuable, so of course it's," Jian Chen replied subconsciously. However, before he could finish his words, Kara Li Wei suddenly leaned forward. She kissed Jian Chen with her cherry-red lips. Jian Chen was caught off guard. He had never thought that Kara Li Wei would do something like this, and he immediately became stunned. However, he returned to his senses very soon. Their lips separated, and Kara Li Wei blushed. She slowly backed away with a slight smile. Spurt. Quan Yukai suddenly spat out a mouthful of wine while he was drinking heartily with Yang Ling. All of it landed on Yang Ling's face, as he too became stunned. Yang Ling used his clothes to wipe his face before looking at Quan Yukai in confusion. "Master Quan Yukai, why have you spat all the wine onto my face? It's such a pity for such good wine." "Miss Li Wei, you," Jian Chen was astounded, as he stared blankly at Kara Li Wei. Kara Li Wei giggled. Her smile was charming, while her blush deepened. She said, "Yang Yutian, you must always remember that you owe me the most important thing." With that, dense radiant saint force suddenly began to condense into a cloud beneath Kara Li Wei. She did not stick around. Instead, she stepped onto the cloud and left the ferry. She made her way to the riverbank. "Yang Yutian, I might as well pass on a message from the ancestor of my clan. The Kara clan wishes to be eternal friends with you." Kara Li Wei's voice rang through the sky. As her voice subsided, she disappeared into the darkness as well. "Jian Chen, what are you waiting for? Go chase her. She's about to run away." Quan Yukai put down his cup and frantically called out to Jian Chen. He was panicking. Jian Chen looked in the direction that Kara Li Wei had disappeared. He shook his head with a forced smile and gently sighed. "Come, let's keep drinking. My God, you missed such a good opportunity. If you chased her, nothing would have been impossible." Regret filled Quan Yukai. Kara Li Wei's appearance was only a small deviation from their plans. They returned to their previous state very quickly, continuing to heartily drink and talk. At that moment, the tight-robed Yu Yu stood in a grassy plain within the artifact space. Beside her lay a 5-meter-long blue wolf littered with sword slashes. There had been bloodshed, and it had stopped breathing long ago. Yu Yu wiped away the sweat on her forehead as she stood before the wolf's corpse. She murmured, "Why do I suddenly feel so uneasy?" After a period of silent thought, she called out to the empty space, "Artifact spirit. This one greets the mistress. What does the mistress require?" The artifact spirit appeared beside Yu Yu out of nowhere. It was extremely polite, as if it was talking to Jian Chen. "Send me out of here," Yu Yu said to the artifact spirit. "Yes, mistress," replied the artifact spirit. He immediately contacted Jian Chen. After he gained Jian Chen's approval, he let Yu Yu out. Yu Yu's appearance on the ferry naturally piqued Yang Ling and Quan Youtsai's curiosity. As a result, Jian Chen introduced Yu Yu to them before continuing to drink. Yu Yu changed into a white dress in the ship's hold, regaining her elegance and nobility as a princess. Afterward, she sat quietly next to Jian Chen and helped refill his cup. She did not speak a lot. At that moment, Hong Lian and He Yu's expressions changed. They sat at the rear of the ship. Both of their eyes suddenly snapped open. Then they leaped to their feet. A gleam of light flashed in their eyes as they glared at the surface of the river. "There's something wrong with the river," Hong Lian said with a deep voice. Her eyes were dyed red at that moment, as if flames rolled within them. At that moment, her eyes seemed to be able to penetrate the void and see through all illusions. A while later, she became surprised. She said with a deep voice, "How is that possible? How can a divine hall hide at the bottom of the river?" "What? A divine hall?" He Yu was also surprised as disbelief filled his face. Hong Lian nodded as she stared fixedly at the bottom of the river. The divine hall has been sealed at the bottom, which concealed all of its presence. Now that the seal has eroded with time, the divine hall is currently breaking free and floating to the top. As soon as Hong Lian finished speaking, the peaceful surface of the river suddenly began to churn. Huge bubbles emerged like boiling water. The entire river began to rise at a visible rate, flowing onto the banks of the river very quickly. I never thought that it would be the bright moon divine hall of the famed fairy Hao Yu from 50,000 years ago. It said that the divine hall was built from some wondrous crystals from the moon, and that the fairy spent 1,000 years traversing to and fro collecting them. Not only is the divine hall extremely tough, it possesses moonlight force, said a knowledgeable expert from the 10 protector clans as they marveled in wonder. Chapter 1041. Saint King Killing Formation, 1. More and more people gathered around the bright moon divine hall. Not only did quite a few saint kings come, a lot of saint rulers arrived as well. There was also some heaven saint masters and class 6 radiant saint masters, who stood on a milky white light. A capital city of the continent was a place where experts gathered. Fragrance River was just outside the city of God, which was why many experts were drawn over immediately when the divine hall broke its seal. A few people with certain backgrounds even used secret techniques to communicate with the experts of their family and their powerful friends, informing them of the current events here. So this object is called a divine hall, something a saint emperor crafted. No wonder it's so wondrous and can fly to such a high place. Quan Yu Kai and Yongling arrived behind Jian Chen, as they marveled at the divine hall that shone with hazy light. The material of this divine hall really is extremely special. It can actually absorb moonlight and transform it into its own power. He Yu stared at the divine hall in wonder. Jian Chen's eyes froze when he heard that, and only after a period of close observation did he notice that the divine hall had indeed absorbed a sliver of moonlight from the night sky. The moonlight was so faint. If he did not look closely, he would not be able to sense it at all. A sliver of reminiscence appeared in Hong Lian's eyes as inherited memories flashed through her head. They're right. This bright moon divine hall is indeed created from special materials from the moon. There are records regarding this material in my inherited memories. Hong Lian paused and raised her head up toward the moon in the sky. This is because in the ancient times, a saint emperor of my divine phoenix clan flew off to the moon. However, she took much more time than fairy Hao Yu, taking up 4,000 years for a round trip. Jian Chen immediately became astounded when he heard these words. He subconsciously looked toward the moon in the sky and sighed emotionally. I never thought that we would be so far away from the moon, that it would take 1,000 or even several thousand years for saint emperors to reach there. This is unbelievable. The moon is indeed a place that people rarely set foot upon. Even in the ancient times when there were the most saint emperors, very few people were willing to spend that much time to fly to the moon, because space gates cannot be created in outer space. The only way to the moon is by flying over slowly, said Hong Lian. The divine hall must possess the cultivation method of fairy Hao Yu. Although only females can use it, if you give it to those talented female clansmen once we take it back, their future accomplishments will be unlimited. The eyes of the experts from the protector clans and a few saint kings of other organizations shone, as they stared at the divine hall with obvious greed. Even if you ignored the value of the material used to build the divine hall, just the cultivation method was enough to cause the people from the protector clans to drool.
This was a cultivation method that surpassed Saint Tier. Even the protector clans that had existed since the ancient times did not have such a great cultivation method. At this moment, the people of the protector clans began to move before everyone else. They either flew toward the Divine Hall themselves or with a few Saint Ruler Juniors. Only the middle-aged man from the Pure Heart Pavilion remained still, as he was the only person who the Divine Hall did not tempt out of everyone present. The people of the protector clans were like flares. As soon as they began to move, the Saint Kings from ancient families or other large organizations began to move as well. They quickly approached the Divine Hall. The Saint Rulers in the surroundings all hesitated, as they levitated in the air. Before the Saint Kings, they had nothing to contend against them as mere Saint Rulers. Even if they came across treasures, they would not be able to beat the Saint Kings to take it for themselves. Instead, they might even face life-threatening danger. However, not all the Saint Rulers feared death. After a while of hesitation, someone finally gave in to their expanding desires, as he flew toward the Divine Hall even with the dangers ahead. However, his actions deeply influenced other people, which immediately led to more and more Saint Rulers flying toward the Divine Hall. Even a few Class 6 Radiant Saint Masters and Heaven Saint Masters followed behind them all. Quan Yu Kai, Yang Ling, it'll be dangerous inside. You two should stay outside and not take part, Jian Chen said to the two of them, before flying toward the Divine Hall with Yu Yu in his arms. He Yu and Hong Lian followed closely behind him. Sigh, looks like a fierce struggle is bound to happen. However, the new master of the Divine Hall seems to have already been secretly determined, said the Saint King of the Pure Heart Pavilion. He glanced at the nearby Jian Chen. When he saw He Yu behind him, an obvious sliver of fear appeared in his eyes. Afterward, he ripped open a space gate and left. He had no plans in interfering with the matter of this Divine Hall. The ancestors of the 8 clans all hung in the air with their pale faces. They stared deeply at the people who flew toward the Divine Hall as regret filled their faces. We're already heavily injured. We don't have the ability to take part in the struggle for the Divine Hall at all, so let's return, said a Saint Ruler of the 8 clans, before leaving first with a face full of regret. The other Saint Rulers all sighed inside. Then they left dejectedly as well. They all returned to the City of God. Jian Chen arrived at the main entrance of the Divine Hall with the crowd. Yu Yu was still in his arms. He hid within the mass of people. Bang! 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 A few muffled sounds rang out from ahead. The people from the protector clans at the very front had already opened the closed door of the Divine Hall. The heavy, stone door slowly opened with a series of rumbles. Immediately, a cold stream of air surged wildly from within. It was almost bone-chilling and gave off a bleak feeling, which shocked everyone present. This is Moonlight Force, called out a Saint King from among the people of the protector clans. Moonlight Force is not Saint Force, so it indeed possesses odd characteristics. No wonder Fairy How You became the most powerful Saint Emperor back then. It probably has a close connection to this unique Moonlight Force other than her own strength, someone suggested. All the people stepped on the floor made from the crystals of the moon, as they slowly made their way inside. After they passed through the main entrance, an extremely vast space appeared before them. In the center of the space stood a 100-meter-tall stone tablet. There were words clearly carved into it. Saint Emperors and Saint Kings are forbidden from entering the Divine Hall, or you will be responsible for the consequences. All the Saint Kings revealed rather horrible expressions when they saw this simple message. Although the warning of the tablet seemed to be filled with confidence and arrogance, where it dared to even look down on Saint Emperor, none of the Saint King present dared to not keep the warning in mind. The owner of the Divine Hall was the Fairy How You. She had reached the peak of Saint Emperor after all, someone who was only inches away from surpassing Saint Emperor. On the other hand, the Saint Rulers and Heaven Saint Masters all became excited. They were all ecstatic, as they internally praised the heavens for being fair. I never thought that the Divine Hall would only allow people below Saint King to enter, barring the entry of Saint Kings and Saint Emperors. Fairy How You must have set up a formation to deal with Saint Kings and Saint Emperors inside. A Saint King of an ancient clan said with an ugly expression. Humph, it has been several tens of thousand years since Fairy How Yu's era. The formation must be far weaker than it was before. Do we really need to fear with so many people? Shouted a blue-robed old man loudly and courageously. Fairy How You may be the strongest Saint Emperor back then and possess terrifying strength, but wouldn't it become a joke if we were scared off just by some words on a tablet?
Another middle-aged man added. He showed no intentions of backing off. Chapter 1042. Saint King Killing Formation, 2. You're right. If so many people are frightened to the point where we would shy away just because of a tablet, would we still have any dignity to move around on the continent? Yuanba will be entering the Bright Moon Divine Hall no matter what today. I'd like to see the abilities of the former strongest Saint Emperor, Fairy Hao Yu, and how great they are. Can she use a mere Divine Hall to kill a Saint King? Said a burly, scar-faced, middle-aged man. All the Saint Kings reacted to these words. The fear in their eyes disappeared, and they became determined. They were not mindless. Since they were able to become Saint Kings, life and death situations had tempered each and every one of them. They had stepped over countless corpses and climbed out from mountains of bodies. How would they fear death? Also, Saint Kings were people who stood on the very apex of the continent, so they naturally had their pride. How could they bear with the fact that just some words scared them away? Looks like it's going to be quite entertaining here. At this moment, clear laughter rang out from behind. Another striking Saint King had entered the Divine Hall. He looked roughly 30 years old, and was extremely handsome. He possessed a scholarly elegance, where all his movements carried great grace. Beside him was a white-dressed, devastating beauty. Kara Liwei. Jian Chen became slightly stunned when he saw her. He had not thought that Kara Liwei had actually returned and would come back to the Divine Hall. Afterward, Jian Chen glanced toward the middle-aged man who stood beside her. His gaze immediately froze. He recognized this man as well. It was the ancestor of the Kara clan that he had met in the imperial palace of the Qin Huang kingdom back then. Karalot, I thought you wouldn't come. I didn't think you'd actually bring the treasure of your clan as well. A heavy voice boomed from the crowd. An ordinary-looking middle-aged man in tight robes spoke to the ancestor of the Kara clan. Karalot laughed and said, "A divine hall has appeared. This is quite a matter on the continent, enough to make all the Saint Kings fight to the point of death for it. If I have enough luck, I can take the divine hall for myself, which will also benefit the clan greatly. Kazda Zhenxiong, why would you think I wouldn't come when there's such a good opportunity?" The middle-aged man was the ancestor of the Kazda clan, which was one of the 3 great clans of the Holy Empire. Then, Karalot looked toward Jian Chen and smiled. "I never thought that Brother Jian Chen would be here as well. Fantastic. If Brother Jian Chen does not mind, I'm willing to travel with Brother Jian Chen, as well as let Li Wei broaden her knowledge in the meantime. Does Brother Jian Chen mind?" Kara Li Wei had also discovered Jian Chen in the crowd. They steadily advanced into the depth with a cautious and vigilant fashion. They ignored the surrounding rooms. "Brother Jian Chen, the most valuable thing here is the cultivation method Fairy Hao Yu left behind. But treasures like that can only be obtained from the very depths of the hall. It definitely won't be outside," the ancestor of the Kara clan explained to Jian Chen. He passed on the experience and knowledge he had accumulated over several thousand years to Jian Chen, while Kazda Zhenxiong would add in a few things from time to time as well. Their intentions for friendship were self-explanatory. The group of them arrived in a huge square where the ceiling was 100 meters above. A huge sculpture stood in the center of the place. It depicted a lady who seemed to be around 20 years of age. Her white clothes made her seem sacred, while her hair was draped on her shoulders. She was extremely pretty, like a goddess from beyond the heavens. She did not seem like an existence that would be present in a mortal realm. This sculpture is undoubtedly Fairy Hao Yu. Fairy Hao Yu sure is a lady worthy of being known as a fairy. She really does look like an otherworldly fairy. Fairy Hao Yu's talent is unprecedented, reaching the peak of Saint Emperor at such a young age. She became the strongest among the Saint Emperors, though it's a pity that she couldn't overcome the final obstacle and break through. She passed away like that. What a pity, what a pity. Many of the Saint Kings stared at the sculpture with mixed emotions, as they discussed. Various emotional sighs and sounds of regret mingled together to form a hubbub. Fairy Hao Yu sure is an unparalleled beauty. Jian Chen stared at the sculpture in a daze as well, as he murmured. Fairy Hao Yu's beauty had completely exceeded the level where it could be praised as devastating. Only the heavenly enchantress could be compared to her out of all the people he had met. At this moment, something suddenly happened. An extremely dense killing intent suddenly appeared,
which filled the entire divine hall. It was bone-chillingly cold, and as soon as it appeared, it invaded the bodies of Saint Kings, worming its way into their bone marrow. It seemed to have frozen the center of their bones, and even Jian Chen was unable to avoid it. All the Saint Kings present revealed extremely horrible expressions. Afterward, surging saint force gushed out from within their bodies in an attempt to resist the invasion of the chilling killing intent. Chapter 1043. Saint King Killing Formation, 3. In a grand fashion, terrifying, surging energy erupted in the square within the divine hall. The energies from all the Saint Kings coiled together and immediately transformed into an extremely great force that flooded the surroundings. It knocked all the Saint Rulers and people below Saint Rulers far away. The Heaven Saint Masters and Class 6 Radiant Saint Masters were affected especially heavily. They all vomited blood as they flew backward. They were all heavily injured, while the fragile Class 6 Radiant Saint Masters had suffered even worse injuries. Jian Chen, He Yu, Hong Lian, Kara Lot, Kazda Zhenxiong, and the great elder of the Protector Chongyang clan gathered together. They all knew Yu and Jian Chen's relationship, so they all worked together without explicit communication to create an energy barrier around Yu and Kara Li Wei, which prevented the two of them from being harmed in any way. This should be a method Fairy How You left behind to deal with Saint Kings in particular. Get the two of them far away from us first so that we can move without worry. Otherwise, it'll be very hard for us to take care of them once we come across true danger, growled the great elder of the Chongyang clan. Brother Jian Chen, what do you think? Kara Lot looked toward Jian Chen. Sure. Jian Chen hesitated slightly, before directly striking the protective barrier around Yu and Kara Li Wei. He knocked the two of them far away. The killing intent here is rapidly becoming stronger. If it continues like this, probably even Saint Kings at great perfection will struggle to resist it. This killing intent is odd. It's not purely killing intent. There seems to be something else within it. Once it invades our bodies, it'll wreak havoc like maggots in the bone. Let's advance faster and pass through this region, everyone called out. Afterward, they all used their surrounding saint force to resist the invasion of the killing intent. They continued toward the depths of the divine hall step by step. However, the deeper they traveled, the denser the killing intent became. Some first heavenly layer Saint Kings even began to struggle with resisting the killing intent. Jian Chen did not emit energy like everyone else. He created a protective barrier on the surface on his body to resist the killing intent and expanded the chaotic force within him to fill every inch. He completely utilized the advantages of the chaotic body, which made resistance even easier. The weird killing intent permeating the divine hall could not break through his body's defenses at all. Jian Chen looked around at the others, and a sliver of suspicion appeared on his face. Even Saint Kings found it rather difficult to resist this killing intent, let alone Saint Rulers. If Saint Rulers had entered this region, they would definitely fail to resist the invasion of the killing intent and die. They would not be able to pass through the place. So why did Fairy How You leave such a warning on the tablet? Perhaps Fairy How You just didn't want the divine hall she spent so much effort into crafting to fall into the hands of others, which was why she cast down this killing formation here to prevent the entry of Saint Kings and Saint Emperors. And that it's not that those below Saint King can enter the divine hall safely, but their strength is just too weak, so they do not catch the fairy's attention? Maybe that was why she did not explain it on the tablet? Jian Chen analyzed inside. He already began to doubt whether everyone had misinterpreted the tablet. If the killing formation did not affect those below Saint King, why would he be faced with the attacks of such a powerful killing intent? After all, his comprehension remained at the 7th heavenly layer of Saint Ruler. Only his prowess in battle reached the level of Saint Kings. At this moment, a barrier silently appeared. It was extremely large and not a normal white. Instead, it was a silvery moonlight condensed from moonlight force. It filled the entire hall and enveloped Jian Chen's group as well as the Saint Rulers and Heaven Saint Masters behind. Moonlight force immediately began to surge within the barrier. It condensed into countless sword chi that fell like rain that traveled toward all the people within the area with unbelievable speed. This included the Saint Rulers, Heaven Saint Masters, and Class 6 Radiant Saint Masters. With this, Yu, Kara Li Wei, and the other experts all changed drastically in expression. Despair filled the eyes of many people. This was an ability from a formation a Saint Emperor cast down,
so its strength was self-evident. How could they resist it? Crap. Jian Chen's expression changed drastically. He used the illusory flash and shot toward Yu Yu at his greatest speed. At the same time, the saint artifact shot out from the center of his eyebrows and transformed into a huge golden tower in the blink of an eye. It shot toward Yu Yu and wanted to approach her. Then, it could suck her into the artifact space. If the saint artifact wanted to suck away someone, it needed to be within a suitable proximity. However, the Moonlight Force Xueqi were just too fast, much faster than Jian Chen and the saint artifact. Before they could even approach Yu Yu, the Xueqi had struck. "You were!" Jian Chen cried out. He was utterly enraged and filled with regret. If he had known earlier, he would have sucked Yu Yu into the artifact space long ago. At the same time, Jian Chen shook violently. Over 10 Xueqi had struck him at the same time, but they were only as strong as attacks from Saint Kings of the first heavenly layer. It could not break through the defense of his chaotic body, so they splattered apart like eggs as soon as they struck him. They recondensed into moonlight force and did not disperse. Jian Chen also arrived beside Yu Yu. However, just when he wanted to send her into the artifact space, he suddenly became stunned. He stared blankly at Yu Yu as disbelief flooded her face. Yu Yu stood there with panic in her eyes, yet she was completely fine. She was unharmed. "Yu Yu, you are fine?" Jian Chen asked in surprise. He had personally experienced the power of the sword Qi, and every single one of them was as powerful as a strike from a first heavenly layer Saint King. An attack like that was extremely fatal to someone with Yu Yu's level of strength. Kara Liwei also stood there, still badly shaken. She could not help but break into laughter when she saw just how much concern Jian Chen had for Yu Yu. She patted her chest and said, "Yang Yuqian, I never thought that you'd care for your fiancé so much. Don't worry, we're fine." Yu Yu warmed up inside when she saw Jian Chen's expression. She smiled sweetly and said, "Jian Chen, don't worry. I'm fine. The sword Qi from before doesn't seem to be able to harm us. Remember the warning on the tablet? These attacks won't affect anyone below Saint King." Jian Chen looked around and realized that everyone weaker than Saint King remained unharmed. Other than a few people injured from the eruption of energy from the Saint Kings, no one else suffered any injuries. Jian Chen came to a realization when he saw this. The warning on the tablet was indeed true. The formations within the Bright Moon Divine Hall indeed could not injure people below Saint King. Although he was still technically a saint ruler, he could display the strength of Saint Kings, which was why the formations recognized him as a Saint King. "Jian Chen, be careful. The sword Qi has condensed again," Yu Yu warned. Jian Chen paid no attention to the sword Qi. The 30-meter-tall saint artifact floated above him. Then, he said to the two of them, "Do you two want to enter the saint artifact?" "Jian Chen, it's not like we'll be harmed if we stay here, so why don't we stay outside? I've never witnessed such a major matter before." Yu Yu turned down Jian Chen's suggestion. Jian Chen hesitated slightly on that, but he still agreed with Yu Yu in the end. He did not force Yu Yu into the artifact space, but he did hand the saint artifact over to Yu Yu. He secretly ordered the artifact spirit to immediately suck the two of them away once they faced danger. The sword Qi condensed from moonlight force once again and shot toward everyone like a blanket. All the Saint Kings used various abilities to resist the sword Qi attacks. As Jian Chen had the chaotic body, he was able to resist against attacks from third heavenly layer Saint Kings. Chapter 1044, Saint King Killing Formation, 4. The Saint Force within that first heavenly layer Saint King leaked out rapidly and floated out into the moonlight barrier. It was refined into moonlight force very quickly, which strengthened the barrier. This can't continue. The more Saint Force you radiate, the stronger the barrier becomes. "You need to leave here as soon as possible," called out a great elder of a protector clan. "If all of your Saint Force gets devoured, you won't be able to leave even if you are a Saint King. You better leave quickly while you still have some remaining energy." Someone within the crowd tried to persuade him. If the Saint Force continued to be refined into moonlight force, it would be extremely detrimental to everyone. The Saint King's complexion had already become the color of moonlight, extremely pale. Under everyone's insistence, he hesitated slightly before he stood up in a trembling fashion. He made his way toward the barrier with a face filled with unwillingness and regret, as he poured all his energy into suppressing the moonlight force within him, in an attempt to reduce the speed that his saint force got devoured. He made his way to the barrier very quickly, but just when he wanted to leave, the barrier obstructed him. Da! The Saint King immediately roared out, as he struck the barrier as hard as he could with the curved blade in his hand. However, the barrier did not even end up trembling. The moonlight force in the sky began to condense once more into densely packed sword chi. It radiated with a great pressure that flooded the divine hall. At the same time, the odd killing intent that invaded their bodies appeared again, and it actually merged into the sword chi strand by strand. It powered up the sword chi. The second heavenly layer. The attacks this time are as powerful as a second heavenly layer Saint King. A Saint King warned the crowd. As soon as he finished his words, the sword chi began to fall and blanketed down on everyone. Jian Chen stood straight where he was, unmoving like a mountain. He allowed the sword chi to strike his body, which had turned his clothes to shreds long ago. His body became littered with white marks that were all due to the sword chi. Another few miserable shrieks rang out. The sword chi was just too tightly packed, so it injured a few more weaker Saint Kings. Weird moonlight force was deposited into their bodies, as it began to devour their saint force. From afar, a group of saint rulers and heaven saint masters stared at this in surprise. In their eyes, Saint Kings were supreme existences, people who stood at the apex. They held illustrious statuses and received the admiration of everyone. Many of them found it quite difficult to believe now that so many Saint Kings had fallen into such horrible shapes. After all, it was the first time for many of the Heaven Saint Masters and a few of the Saint Rulers who had entered the Divine Hall to see a Saint King. The sword chi is constantly becoming stronger. If this continues, it'll become strong to the point where we can't resist it very soon. We can't just sit and wait for that to happen. We need to break through the barrier as soon as possible, called out a Saint King. Immediately, around a dozen Saint Kings drew their saint weapons. Tremendous saint force surged wildly within the barrier, before striking the barrier at the same time. Boom! Terrifying energy ripples pushed the Heaven Saint Masters and Saint Rulers backward, while the fragile Class 6 Radiant Saint Masters suffered quite some heavy damage. However, Yu Yu and Kara Liwei did not sustain any damage, as they had the protection of the Saint Artifact. After taking on the combined attack from more than 10 Saint Kings, the barrier immediately began to shake violently. However, it did not shatter. What a powerful barrier, a Saint King could not help but exclaim. He became much sterner. The Saint Rulers and people below Saint Ruler backed off some more, as they almost stuck to the barrier. All the injured Heaven Saint Masters sat with their legs crossed, as they healed their wounds. Meanwhile, a milky white light surrounded the Class 6 Radiant Saint Masters. They were using Radiant Saint Force to heal their wounds. The moonlight force within the barrier immediately began to churn after the barrier resisted the combined attack from the Saint Kings. It condensed into densely packed sword chi in the sky once more, though there were much fewer than before. However, its power had drastically increased. Swish! 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 With a series of ear-piercing sounds, the sword chi rained upon them with unbelievable speed. Although the number had lessened, it was still like a blanket. No one could dodge it, so they were only able to forcefully resist it. After the wave of attacks, the sword chi struck 3 more Saint Kings. Although their wounds were not life-threatening, the moonlight force was extremely weird. The residue in their bodies began to devour their saint force. Regardless of how hard they tried, they could not purge it, which forced them to devote all their power into resisting it and slowing down the dissipation of their saint force. This wave of sword chi has already reached the 3rd heavenly layer. If it continues like this, the next wave should be at the 4th heavenly layer, and then the 5th, the 6th, and so on. It'll go on forever, until all of us die here. If we let that happen, we will all die. No one will be able to survive. Everyone, do not hold back. Strike the barrier with all your strength. The speakers were 2 ancestors from ancient clans. This time, everyone decided to contribute. They gathered all their power to strike at the same time, and they sent an earth-shaking attack at the barrier. Jian Chen had also drawn his emperor armament and struck the barrier as soon as he could. Resisting this wave of attacks was already the limits of his chaotic body. If he did not break through the barrier, the next wave would be able to pierce his body. Although he had no idea if the moonlight force could devour his chaotic force,
It was not something he wanted to risk. Boom! The combined attacks of all the Saint Kings finally broke through the extremely tough barrier, reducing it into dense strands of moonlight force that floated around the divine hall. Everyone would not help but smile slightly in relief now that they had destroyed the barrier. However, before long, a cold voice boomed out in the empty space. Those who have not heeded the warning, take responsibility for your actions. With that, streaks of bright and pure moonlight suddenly appeared. It shone blindingly like sunlight as 9 balls of light floated above the sculpture of Fairy Hao Yu in the center of the area. Each ball of light shone with bright moonlight. From afar it seemed like 9 small moons. Rumble. The divine hall began to shake violently. One of the moons that floated above the sculpture suddenly began to enlarge and shine with dazzling light. Everyone could not help but close their eyes. When they opened their eyes once more, the scene before them had already completely changed. The familiar divine hall had disappeared and a desolate land now replaced it. There was nothing as far as the eye could see except for dry earth. All the Saint Kings changed in expression when they saw this. They had all realized that they had fallen into another formation. Everyone had fallen into it, including the first heavenly layer Saint King who was injured at the very start. It could be said that all the Saint Kings that had entered the divine hall had gathered in this formation once more. Is this landscape the moon? The great elder from the Chongyang clan looked around in interest, as he said with surprise and suspicion. It doesn't matter if this landscape is the moon or not. We need to break out as soon as possible, as it definitely can't be safe. And that sudden voice back then, was that Fairy Hao Yu's voice? A great elder from the Yuan sect said with a sunken face. Uneasiness filled his eyes. Many people could not but change an expression when they heard that, but someone rebuked very quickly. Fairy Hao Yu passed away in meditation several tens of thousand years ago, so it's impossible for her to still be alive. She must have left behind that voice back then. At this moment, a mysterious suction silently appeared. It gathered around the people and slowly pulled out their saint force. Everyone immediately changed in expression. They all sat down quickly and poured all their strength into resisting the suction. However, they failed to stop the expansion of their saint force no matter how hard they tried. Jian Chen also felt the weird mysterious force gathering around him, as if it was drawing the chaotic force within him outward. His chaotic force also began to show signs of movement, as if it had broken free of his control and was drifting outward. However, chaotic force could not be compared to saint force in the end. Under Jian Chen's control, the chaotic force immediately calmed down and did not expand outward like the saint force of the Saint Kings. What a weird formation and force. I actually can't prevent the energy within me from expanding. If that's the case, let me break through this formation. I'd like to see if it can resist a strike from me. Yu raised his head and his gaze sharpened. A slivery white machete appeared in his right hand, radiating with a chilling pressure. It was a weapon with origin energy. Just with that weapon, Yu could deal attacks as strong as Saint Emperors and fight hand in hand with them. At the very top of the divine hall, there was an extremely pretty and illusory woman that currently sat on a pure white piece of jade within a completely sealed room. Her eyes were closed but suddenly, she became surprised. Her eyes snapped open, and she cried out involuntarily, "Origin energy! This is origin energy! How is this possible? How can origin energy exist in this world? Wasn't all the origin energy sealed up in the distant void of space? How can this energy exist here?" The illusory woman stood up from the piece of jade, and her emotions began to churn. She was not calm in any way, and even excitement seemed to have appeared on her illusory face. Chapter 1045, Saint King Killing Formation, 5. Yu shot into the sky with his origin energy machete, and he chopped at the sky with lightning speed. A magnificent ray appeared. It shot through the sky as if it could destroy the surroundings and immediately caused the space of the formation to violently tremble. Yu's machete had not even struck the formation, yet it had suffered great disruptions and showed signs of breaking apart. All the Saint Kings trapped in the formation stared unblinkingly at Yu. Their faces burned with greed and hope. There was no one present that Yu's powerful origin energy weapon did not tempt, but none of them had the courage to try and steal it. He has finally personally moved. How can this mere formation stop us since he's someone who can even go up against Saint Emperors? All the Saint Kings who knew Yu's strength showed expression of relief.
None of them believed the formation could withstand He Yu's attack, as it was just too mighty. They all shivered inside just by standing to one side. At the same time, the illusory woman's eyes immediately lit up in the sealed room at the top of the divine hall. She said, "How can you people break through the illusory formation of 9 moons I personally cast down? I may not be able to use the full strength of the formation due to the limitations of my strength, but it's still not something Saint Emperors can break through. Even experts in the origin realm will need to expend a great effort to break through it. 9 moons as one." The woman formed a seal with her hands, which constantly changed before her chest. Immediately, the 8 other smaller moons that floated above the sculpture fused with the first moon and completely became one. All the people below Saint King stood blankly afar, as they watched everything unfold. To them, they had completely lost sight of the Saint Kings. An extremely huge moon stood in the previous location of the Saint Kings. It seemed extremely like the moon, illuminating the entire area with moonlight. The moon originated from the formation, which was extremely profound. The area within the formation was an independent space that trapped all the Saint Kings. Within the formation space, He Yu's machete viciously struck the barrier of the formation. However, now that the 9 moons had fused as one, the formation's power had greatly increased. It was nowhere as weak as before, so He Yu's attack on the level of Saint Emperors could only cause it to tremble gently after he struck. It stabilized very soon and did not shatter. "This is impossible." All of the hopeful Saint Kings changed in expression when they witnessed this, as they immediately cried out. Disbelief filled all of them. This clearly stunned He Yu as well. He lowered his head to look at his machete as disbelief clouded his eyes. The formation has suddenly become much more powerful. With its current strength, probably even Saint Emperors will struggle to break through it, Hong Lian said from beside Jian Chen. Her eyes had already become red, as if 2 balls of flames burned inside. She was using a secret technique to observe the formation. Crap. The formation has strengthened greatly, and the energy within me is leaking out at a great speed, someone cried out. All the Saint Kings present bathed in a thick layer of Saint Force, as their energy leaked from their bodies at a rate several dozen times faster than before. Then, their Saint Force dispersed in the surroundings. The mysterious suction force present in the formation space drew it out. He Yu and Hong Lian were not spared from it either. No one could stop it. Jian Chen's complexion also became rather horrible. Now that the suction force had grown, the chaotic force that he had just stabilized began to lose control again. Strands of it flowed outward uncontrollably, except it was nowhere near as fast as the Saint Force in the Saint Kings. Strands of weak, gray energy appeared around Jian Chen. An aura of destruction filled it, which was extremely different from the energies within the other Saint Kings. All the Saint Kings naturally detected Jian Chen's chaotic force, but no one paid attention to the unique chaotic force, as they were struggling just for themselves. A sliver of panic appeared in Jian Chen's eyes. Chaotic force was extremely difficult to replenish. He could not afford an overconsumption of chaotic force. Suddenly, Jian Chen roared at the sky. His eyes shone, as he poured all his strength into controlling the chaotic force. It immediately stopped flowing outward under his control, and the chaotic force around him also began to approach him bit by bit. It eventually returned into his body in the end. Odd. Just what is this power? I can clearly feel the greatness of this power, but why have I never seen it before? The illusory woman murmured in the room at the very top of the divine hall. She furrowed her brows in thought. Suddenly, she seemed to think of something. Her eyes immediately lit up, and disbelief filled her face. She said, "I remember my father once mentioned a powerful energy called chaotic force. Why does the characteristics of this energy match up with the chaotic force my father mentioned? Is this chaotic force, however?" The woman suddenly shook her head. "Impossible. How can chaotic force appear in this world? Isn't this a great power that only people in that world can cultivate?" Chapter 1046. Fight for the Divine Hall, 1. Xiaobai wants to take the Saint Artifact in. If that was possible, it could store Jian Chen and the others into the artifact. Then it can bring them out. It's a pity that the Saint Artifact can't enter. Yu Yu murmured softly. She had understood the White Tiger's intentions very quickly. The Saint Artifact spun, as it shone with a hazy golden light by the side of the formation, before returning to the air above Yu.
It needed to keep Yu safe. In the formation space, the white tiger opened its mouth.
It knew that the saint artifact did not enter the formation with it, and it immediately growled at the formation.
It seemed to be filled with frustration. Jian Chen understood the familiar white tiger's intentions at first thought after he saw its behavior.
He said, "Xiao Bai, the formation that traps us is just too powerful. We can't break it even when we all work together. All we can do now is wait for someone outside to gain control of the Divine Hall, which will allow them to control the Divine Hall as well. Immediately take Yu and Kara Liwei into the depths of the Divine Hall, to the control center."
The white tiger looked at Jian Chen, as he worked hard to control his chaotic force, and worry appeared in its eyes. Afterward, it produced a deep growl, as if it had agreed to Jian Chen's instructions.
"Xiao Bai, tell the artifact spirit after you get out to not let Senior Ruei-jin out no matter what. Keep him in the artifact space, until you leave the Divine Hall. Also, Xie Wang, who followed me in the Sea Realm, is still cultivating inside the artifact space. Get the artifact spirit to contact him and get him to protect you all as you venture into the depths." Jian Chen gave a long list of orders to the white tiger. Whether the people trapped in the formation could leave would completely depend on the people outside.
If they failed, all the Saint Kings inside would die. The white tiger left the artifact space with Jian Chen's words.
It arrived outside and recounted everything that Jian Chen had said, word by word, to the artifact spirit. Although the white tiger could not speak human tongue, the artifact spirit could understand him since he was a spirit. He immediately informed Yu and Kara Liwei of Jian Chen's current situation. Yu immediately paled when she learned that Jian Chen was currently in danger. Her face was filled with anxiety and deep worry, as she lost her normal composure. Kara Liwei was also anxious, but she tried as hard as she could to keep her composure. She comforted Yu. "Sister Yu, don't worry. Don't we still have ways to save Jian Chen? As long as we find the control center of the Divine Hall, we'll be able to save Jian Chen without him suffering any harm at all."
Yu tightly clenched her jade-like hands. Her palms were sweaty.
Ruei-jin stared at Xie Wang with bright eyes. Although Xie Wang had never seen Ruei-jin before, Ruei-jin was definitely someone that belonged on Jian Chen's side since he could appear here. He could even vaguely feel a pressure that made him shiver, which allowed him to know that the middle-aged man before him was definitely a powerful and terrifying expert. Xie Wang did not show any resistance toward Ruei-jin's intentions of planting a restriction within him. He accepted it calmly, as he had no other choice. Afterward, Ruei-jin planted a restriction on Xie Wang's soul through a secret technique of the Dragon Clan. Xie Wang's life was basically in Ruei-jin's hand with the restriction, as Ruei-jin only needed a single thought to wipe out Xie Wang's soul if he did anything unexpected. Xie Wang and the white tiger left the artifact space together and appeared beside Yu. Yu had already learned of Xie Wang's identity in detail from the artifact spirit, so she did not become surprised when she saw him. She only observed him curiously, as this was her first time meeting a member of the sea race.
"Is this Jian Chen's woman?
I never thought that her strength would be this bad." Xie Wang observed Yu curiously as well, and he immediately felt a sliver of surprise when he saw her strength.
Yu greets Senior Xie Wang.
"I shall be in your care." Yu greeted Xie Wang politely with a bow and did not refer to him in the casual fashion that Jian Chen did.
Xie Wang gained a good impression of Yu with how she behaved.
He laughed aloud and said, "You're Jian Chen's woman, so you're not an outsider anyway. There's no need for us to be so polite, so just spare the terms of seniority. Just call me Xie Wang." Xie Wang and Yu spoke some more, before focusing on the main problem. Afterward, they left for the depths of the Divine Hall with the White Tiger and Kara Liwei. Quite a few saint rulers and heaven saint masters had already entered the depths before them when Yu's group had left. There were also some heaven saint masters and class 6 radiant saint masters who had given up on that idea and directly backed out of the Divine Hall. They spread the news of all the trapped Saint Kings in the Divine Hall at the same time. There were still quite a lot of people floating in the cool night sky outside the Divine Hall. This included the people from the Radiant Saint Master, such as the President and the Grand Elder. As Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters, they did not enter the Divine Hall. Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters enjoyed exalted statuses on the Tianyuan continent, which were in no shape or form below Saint Kings.
Also, they never took part in any of the killings and battles on the continent, so the Bright Moon Divine Hall did not possess any great use to them. They did not have the need at all to risk their lives and compete for the Divine Hall. What? All the Saint Kings that entered have been trapped. The people from the Union and the other people in the crowd all changed in expressions when they heard this news. They all felt rather perturbed, as the fear in their gazes toward the Divine Hall deepened. The formation of the Divine Hall only targets Saint Kings and those beyond Saint King. Heaven Saint Masters and Saint Rulers are resistant to the attacks of the Divine Hall. A Heaven Saint Master who had exited said loudly. With that, the Saint King who had just hurried over through space gates and were about to enter the Divine Hall immediately halted. They became torn between surprise and suspicion. Suddenly, his eyes froze and he stared fixedly at the roof of the Divine Hall. A middle-aged man in white robes stood proudly at the highest point of the Divine Hall. No one knew exactly when he had appeared. The man seemed to have fused with the surrounding space, becoming a part of the surroundings. No one actually discovered him, as he stood in such a brazen fashion on top of the Divine Hall other than the Saint King. He seemed to be transparent, which made it extremely easy for people to miss him. The Path Lord of Carnal Desires. The Saint King recognized the man at first glance, and his eyes narrowed suddenly. In that moment, the evil-looking face of the Path Lord was rather pale. He stood rather haggardly on the top of the Divine Hall, as he mumbled to himself, "Fairy, how you sure is extravagant to collect material from the moon to build such a powerful Divine Hall. The moonlight force within this Divine Hall is weird and powerful. Also, the toughness of the Divine Hall cannot be compared with any ordinary Divine Hall. Even if I want to break through it, it'll be extremely difficult. It's a pity that the Origin Energy injured me last time. Origin Energy is just too powerful. I can't recover in such a short amount of time, and my strength is greatly reduced. Otherwise, I'd like to see what Fairy how you had prepared all those years ago in the Divine Hall," the Path Lord said with some regret. Afterward, he vanished. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.